Is it your experiment? God, what did you do? On the plane transporting Hulk, Banner and Betty immediately guessed that this monster was probably made by General Ross. General Ross was silent, and the image of Bronski involuntarily flashed across his mind. Looking at the screen that lost the picture, Banner and Betty looked at General Ross. Sir. His subordinates asked him what to do. After a long time, Ross ordered all troops to go to Brooklyn. His voice seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. One problem has just been solved, and a bigger one pops up in the blink of an eye. Why is this happening? He couldn't figure it out. Hearing General Ross's order, Banner took a deep breath, and then said in a firm tone, "Let me go, you must let me go." He saw the shadow of Hulk from that monster. It was Hulk, a scourge created by himself, and he was going to solve it. What are you talking about? Betty wondered. You think you can control it? Betty didn't want Banner to take any more risks. It's not about controlling it, it's about exploiting it, Banner explained. What if you can't? General Ross snapped. We created that thing. Banner said solemnly, all of us. I beg you. General Ross stared deeply at Banner for a long time, then turned his head and ordered, land near it. He compromised. Now, face and honor are irrelevant. If we continue to let that monster ravage the streets, how bad will it be for New York and this country? Only let the Hulk, let his experiment, let his enemy try it, use one basket he pokes to solve another. No, stay at high altitude and open the rear hatch. Banner said. General Ross nodded in agreement. Banner stood at the open rear hatch. Betty held her anxiously and said, Bruce, what are you doing? You have to think clearly, you don't know if you will transform. Betty begged bitterly. She was afraid that Banner's transformation would fail and he would be crushed to pieces. Betty, I must try. Banner gazed at Betty affectionately. Doesn't he know that Hulk has been suppressed by the potion, and may even be wiped out? This jump will either succeed or become benevolent. But because of this, he wanted to jump down and give it a try. In this case, unless encountering a life-and-death crisis, how to wake up Hulk? If the Hulk is not awakened, how should the monster be dealt with like this? The two looked at each other silently, then gradually moved closer and kissed each other. Is this the last kiss of farewell forever? Nobody knows. Lips parted, Banner let go of Betty's hand, fell backwards, and fell from the plane. Betty maintained the original posture, stretched out her hand as if trying to grab Banner who was going away, and followed him all the way down. Boom! Banner landed, smashing a small, human-shaped pit. Did he succeed? Everyone on the plane held their breath and prayed silently. Currently, the gray-green monster that appeared at the intersection of 121 North to Broadway in Brooklyn is still raging. According to relevant departments, the corresponding strike and rescue operations have begun, but some people at the scene said that the monster has wiped out a small army. Bullets and rocket launchers have no effect on it. It is recommended that the surrounding residents quickly evacuate and pay attention to the news of this station. The follow-up situation is being broadcast. In Manhattan, New York, in a small bar in Hell's Kitchen, a famous Marvel scenic spot, the tragedies in Brooklyn are being broadcast non-stop on TV. Watching a series of bloody and terrifying videos broadcast on TV, the atmosphere in the bar became even more heated. Oh my god, what kind of monster is this? TSK, I really want to see how powerful this big guy is. Are you crazy? That guy will tear you apart. Not necessarily, if it dares to come to Hell's Kitchen. Listening to the discussion in the bar, Lynch hiccuped and put down the Coke in his hand. He doesn't like drinking very much. As for whether there is Coke in the bar in Hell's Kitchen, and whether drinking Coke will result in a beating, these things are not for Lynch to consider. He just hit it right, accidentally smacking the bar's marble bar into pieces as he slapped the money on the table. Well, it's 15 centimeters thick, and it's so hard that a fist can hit it like a broken stone. The effect is very good, it can be called a knowing blow. The bartender who said impatiently that there was no Coke ran to buy a bucket of Coke, and carefully crafted it into various flavors. Also put an end to all kinds of annoying punks, thieves, liars and so on. Leaning on the spacious deck sofa, tasting the Coke in front of you one by one, enjoying the winks from the beauties passing by from time to time, originally wanted to experience the passion of Hell's Kitchen, but had to experience the rare peace and friendliness of Hell's Kitchen. Lynch couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Strong, maybe it is so boring and tasteless. Hey, can I sit here? A voice suddenly interrupted Lynch's narcissism. No. Lynch subconsciously rejected the fifth woman who said so today. But he immediately raised his head, looked at the person and said, Natasha, why are you here? The visitor was the sexy and beautiful Natasha in a short skirt and low-cut dress, do not you know? Natasha sat next to Lynch without a trace, then leaned into his ear and whispered, "That monster in Brooklyn." Lynch took a sip of Coke lazily, and replied leisurely, "How could you not know?" He pointed to the TV, "This is broadcast everywhere, even if you don't know it, it's hard." Natasha pursed her lips and smiled, her bright eyes turned to Lynch. Lynch was so scared, he couldn't help but sit back and asked, "Is there any problem?" "What are you looking at?" "I'm watching Superboy." Natasha smiled. "Why is he still sitting here? Otherwise?" Lynch rolled his eyes, feeling that Natasha seemed to have a problem today. "Do I have to fly out to fight monsters?" Although the usual Natasha always smiles and speaks softly enough, but the longer you get in touch with her, the more you can feel the distance from her. Compared with the kind of person who is indifferent on the outside and hot on the inside, in fact, Natasha is more difficult to deal with. A person like Natasha who is quite friendly once in contact, but who is always difficult to get along with. But today, Lynch could feel that the distance between Natasha and himself seemed to be much closer. Still, Lynch's answer was no. No, dame. I'm not working part-time, so if something goes wrong, I have to go to work." "Why?" Natasha picked up a glass of Coke and took a sip. "Can you tell me the reason?" "First, this thing was made by Ross. I said that I would let him die with regret and pain. Second, this matter has nothing to do with me, and I have no interest." "Why do you want to do it?" Lynch replied flatly. Natasha sighed, and said softly, "Ross is the culprit, but innocent citizens paid the price." "Why do you say it has nothing to do with you? Do you know how many people are asking why their superheroes are there? Yes, Brooklyn needs superheroes, and New York needs them, but there are more people in this world who are praying to the gods. Who do you say I should listen to? Do you know how many people pray every day for you to be destroyed one day?" Lynch replied bluntly. Natasha was speechless. She was silent for a long time, then put down the cup in her hand and got up. "Okay, then I wish you a good time. I have to fight this guy to death." After that, she turned her head away with a hurt face. Lynch immediately failed, and looked at Natasha's back and couldn't help but burst out laughing. "All right, you win." Lynch was helpless. In fact, someone has already made a move. If there is no accident, it will solve this matter. Natasha came back again and asked in confusion, You mean Brooklyn, where abominations rage?" There was a sudden vibration in the deep hole that Banner made, and then a green hand stretched out suddenly. "It's Hulk, Banner did it." Everyone on the plane couldn't help cheering. It climbed up from the pit and tore off the pieces of clothes hanging on its body one by one. Roar! Facing the hatred in the distance, Hulk roared angrily. "Hulk, attack! Hulk!" Looking back in hatred, he whispered in a hateful voice. Great! The strong competitive spirit and the hatred that almost ignited it made him ecstatic to see Hulk at the moment. He, who obtained such power only by incarnating as a monster, urgently needs a real victory, real revenge to soothe its crazy heart. Hulk. The guy who kicked him into a waste. Be sure, you must repay everything you have suffered. Hatred impatiently set off and ran towards Hulk. And Hulk also tore off the obstructing clothes little by little with a fierce look on his face, roaring and accelerating towards the abomination. In just a few breaths, the two gamma monsters came together. For a moment, the two jumped up high at the same time, raised their fists full of explosive power, and smashed at each other. Boom! A wave of air that was almost visible to the naked eye was generated between the two, and the surrounding lights and glass shattered unbearably. In the confrontation, the taller, stronger and in good condition abomination clearly won, knocking the Hulk affected by the potion to the ground. Then, taking advantage of Hulk's weakness on the ground, the abomination grabbed Hulk's body and threw it vigorously. Hulk was like a baseball that was thrown out, completely unable to control his huge body, and flew upside down tens of meters before stopping in front of a police car. It lay on the ground, shook its drowsy mind, managed to get up, and staggered to the ground again. The loathing followed, triumphantly stepping on the flames, let out a deep and terrifying laugh triumphantly, and called Hulk molestingly, "Keep coming." Hulk took a look at the abomination, and seemed to know that he could not resist the abomination with his body, so he lowered his head and glanced at the police car. So it hit the police car with its fist, split it in half like cutting a watermelon, and put it on each hand, looking like a pair of gloves. The abomination rushed to Hulk and punched him, but was caught off guard by Hulk wearing police car gloves and took 2 steps back. Hulk was so unreasonable, he took advantage of the situation and punched left, right, and finally an uppercut with his right hand. The abomination was knocked to the ground, Hulk sat on the abomination, and his two big fists hit the abomination's tough body non-stop. But as we all know, New York police cars are the most fragile things, and countless are damaged every year. Therefore, after a few punches, the police car glove in Hulk's hand turned into pieces and fell to the ground. Hulk slammed two fists on the ugly cheek of the abomination again, but found that it seemed that his small fist could not hurt the abomination at all. Abomination spat, and mocked with disdain on his face, "Is this all you have?" Exactly the same as what Bronsky said to the Hulk that day. But it was different from being kicked into a comminuted fracture that day. This time, it has the qualifications to say this. Hulk was furious when he heard the words, and he clenched his fists to show the hatred, but was grabbed by the hatred and kicked. Feng Shui took turns, and this time it was Hulk's turn to be kicked mercilessly and smashed into a building not far away. The abomination roared and continued to chase. One jumped directly onto the Hulk tower, and peeked inside from the big hole that Hulk smashed. At this time, seeing that Hulk was at a disadvantage in the battle with the abomination, the helicopter that was hovering at high altitude lowered its altitude and came to the air not far from the abomination. "Help it with a machine gun." General Ross ordered the helicopter pilot. "Which one will you help?" "The green one." "Kill the other one." Rose yelled. The helicopter immediately shot out a tongue of flame, and a series of machine gun bullets drifted and hit Abomination's body. Turning around in disgust, seeing General Ross on the helicopter, he was furious. "Ross!" It roared at the bullets, and decided to put down the Hulk and kill Ross first. The hatred climbed along the building to the roof, leaving a series of potholes on the building. The helicopter quickly followed the abomination into the air, and the bullets poured on the fast-running abomination. The abomination pretended to flee, leading the helicopter to drive it across the rooftops. Hulk woke up from the trash can under the other side of the building, followed the gunshots and looked up, just in time to see the abomination and the helicopter flying between the two buildings. With a low growl, Hulk jumped anxiously onto the house in front of him, quickly climbed up, and chased after the abomination and the helicopter. "Keep firing." General Ross ordered the driver loudly. However, Abomination stopped abruptly, took a cold look, then changed direction, and rushed towards the helicopter that continued to fly forward, and was about to catch the helicopter in one jump. Seeing this, the Hulk behind him immediately accelerated, and it was also a big jump. The huge body of the abomination stretched out in the air, just like its heart is as happy as it is at the moment. "Ross, finally got you." But what it didn't expect was that Hulk flew over from the side, grabbed it and pulled it hard. The abomination suddenly sank, and barely grabbed the helicopter frame, while Hulk grabbed the abomination's body. In this way, the two gamma monsters were suspended from the precarious helicopter. Hulk pinched the flesh thorn on Abomination's body firmly, and Abomination did not show any weakness, and greeted Hulk again and again with the free fist. Finally, Hulk, who couldn't bear the pain, was hammered and suddenly let go of his hand, but it immediately grabbed the hatred and pulled it vigorously. This drag made the helicopter tremble violently, and staggered towards a water storage tank on a building. The abomination and the Hulk collided into the water storage tank together, and even the helicopter finally lost control. The helicopter, bearing an unbearable weight, swirled with the two monsters and fell to the ground. The Hulk who landed got up weakly, looking worriedly at the crashed helicopter. But the hatred didn't give it a chance to continue watching. It stood on the helicopter, wiped the blood from the corner of its mouth, and rushed towards Hulk with a hiss. Hulk withdrew his gaze, and looked weakly at the alive and kicking abomination. At this moment it is in a strange state due to the influence of the potion, possessing both the power of Hulk and part of Banner's thinking. So it wants to protect Betty, it wants to defeat the abomination. Even though its whole body is weak at the moment, even a kind of exhaustion that has never been felt hits it in bursts, as if it is saying to it, "Go to sleep, it will be fine after sleeping. Do not. Get yourself together. Can't lose." In Hulk's simple thinking, this is a battle that he cannot lose even if he loses his life. It forcibly cheered up, put away its tiredness, and let its face be covered with ferocity like a beast. In a blink of an eye, the fist of hatred had already struck, and Hulk raised his fist to parry, but he couldn't resist the power of hatred at all. Hulk was knocked into the air by the abomination again. This time, it was finally approaching its limit. Hate pinned Hulk against the wall, the spikes from his hands digging deep into Hulk's body. "You don't deserve this kind of power at all. Just watch her die in front of you." Loathing pressed against Hulk's pained face. He cursed viciously in its ear. "Hulk, knock this down." Suddenly, a voice from General Ross came to Hulk along with a black shadow. Time went back to when the helicopter crashed, and Betty woke up first in the dark helicopter. Dad! Betty climbed up to General Ross. Are you okay? Let me help you. Rose was helped up by Betty in pain, and said, I'm fine, we have to get out quickly. With that said, General Ross and Betty struggled to move outside the open hatch. At this moment, Hulk was being pressed against the wall by the abomination, his body was pierced by flesh thorns, and he kept whining. Seeing this, General Ross' expression began to change. Hulk, Lynch, abomination. One monster after another became enemies because of his super soldier plan, causing him trouble after trouble. Hulk, Lynch's accident, was hidden by the acquiescence of the upper management because both sides intentionally controlled it in a small area. But this time, the unbridled hatred that raged on the streets of New York directly tore apart the fragile harmony Ross had maintained for so long. Ross couldn't help thinking to himself. Did I really do something wrong? Is the Super Soldier Project really without a future? Still is. Is there a problem with the means of doing things that you think are not important? Hulk was framed by himself, so he was forced to flee. Lynch was forcibly captured by himself, so he fled and destroyed the military base. Perhaps, the sacrifices that one thinks should be made for the country, the devotion that does not need a reason at all, is not recognized by everyone. And now, it's time to make a choice. Rose thought of the dose of serum. Before he acted, he did not know why he carried it. Now, Hulk is obviously unable to fight against this more powerful monster. If Hulk is killed, the next to die will be himself and his daughter, and then New York. If you use the serum on Hulk, there is a high chance of success. In this way, the monster can be defeated and all tragedies can be avoided. But after using it, Hulk will definitely be more difficult to control in the future, and his super soldier plan will lose hope forever. Abandon the super soldier project, or gamble on a hope of saving everything? He returned to the helicopter silently, slowly groping for something in the dark. After a long time, he returned to the helicopter hatch with a small bag. Rose lifted the small bag with all his strength and threw it at Hulk. Hulk, knock this down. Then, he fell dejectedly to the ground. He made a choice, chose to give up trying to make the ultimate soldier for the slightest chance of saving himself, his daughter, Banner, and New York City. This decision undoubtedly rejected all the efforts he had made over the years. He rejected his humiliation, his painstaking efforts, and all the evil things he did. The packet drew an arc and landed by Hulk's hand. Serum. Abomination, who maintained complete wisdom, guessed what was in this small bag in an instant, and couldn't help adding more strength to his hand. Damn Ross. Don't want to use the serum for me, but Hulk, a mindless monster. What qualifications does it have? I am the perfect soldier. The hatred was furious in his heart, and the thorn in his hand went deeper into Hulk's body. Hulk wailed in pain, like a wounded beast. Its still ignorant mind didn't quite understand the meaning of the small bag that Ross threw, so it looked in the direction of the helicopter in confusion. What caught my eyes was Betty's worried and sad expression on the verge of tears. Do not. Can't make her sad. Can't make her sad. Hulk was stimulated by this expression, and a deep and terrifying green light erupted from his eyes, and a powerful force from an unknown place suddenly filled Hulk's body. Roar! Hulk yelled violently, grabbed the hand of the abomination that was pressing on him, and opened it bit by bit. Hulk and abomination clasped their hands together, frantically wrestling with all their strength. Hate was surprised to find that Hulk's strength became unexpectedly stronger for some reason, and it was difficult for him to parry for a while. With all his strength, Hulk pushed the abomination fiercely, threw the abomination away, and then grabbed the abomination that flew upside down and threw it against the wall. At this moment, a stray bullet flew from nowhere and landed on the oil-filled ground after the plane crashed. In an instant, the flames rose. Seeing the fireworks engulfing the helicopter along the engine oil, Hulk aroused his potential, flew over in an instant, stretched out his two big hands, swung them round and slapped the flames. The two palms instantly slapped a strong whirlwind, blowing away the flames on the helicopter. The flame disappeared, and Betty reappeared at the hatch, only to see Abomination standing up from behind Hulk. Be careful. Betty reminded loudly. But Hulk was still knocked down by the big iron block that the Abomination found from nowhere. Hulk fell to the ground, barely got up, and the hatred dragged the iron block and smashed it on Hulk again. This time Hulk fell to the ground and didn't get up for a long time. The Abomination dragged the iron block and swung it up bit by bit, but the target was no longer the fallen Hulk. General, do you have any last words? It glared at Ross with hatred, and wanted to get rid of this old guy and Betty who looked down on him first, so that Hulk could feel the pain. The iron block was spinning in the air, accumulating terrifying power. If this smash fell on Rose and Betty, it would definitely crush them to pieces. At the critical moment, Hulk felt new power again. It stood up again, raised its hands high above its head, and issued a call sign that belonged to Hulk. Hulk strikes. Accompanied by the slogan, it clenched its fists and hit the ground with all its might. Under Hulk's fierce blow, a deep chasm was smashed into the ground. The crack spread all the way to the feet of the abomination in an instant, causing the abomination who raised the iron block to deliver a fatal blow to step on the air, and staggered. Hate's body fell short, and the iron chain connected to the iron block came out of his hand, and was thrown high into the air. Then Loathing watched in horror as the iron block fell straight down from its head, and it struggled twice, but because it stepped into the crack, it couldn't dodge at all. Boom! The iron block hit the abomination, and the chain wrapped around the abomination's neck. For a moment, Abomination's feet were bound by cracks, his neck was also entangled in chains, and he fell to the ground in pain. Hulk seized the opportunity and grabbed the chain from behind to strangle the abomination's neck. The Loathing struggled frantically, and its foot finally slipped through the crack. Hulk refused to let go of this opportunity, and the two entangled and rolled back and forth on the ground to fight hand to hand. After a few rounds, the hatred was gradually deprived of oxygen due to the chokehold, and its strength gradually weakened, and was firmly controlled by Hulk from behind. Hate felt the chains around his neck getting tighter and tighter, everything in front of him gradually began to blur, and he waved his hands involuntarily. Suddenly, it felt like it had touched something. Just as he picked up this thing and wanted to throw it at Hulk, he suddenly realized what it was. "Hulk, don't let him use that." Rose's anxious and frightened shouts came from the side. Late. Laughing wildly with hatred, he crushed the bag in his hand, touched the potion inside, and directly stabbed his leg fiercely. No. General Ross was shocked and angry. "Kill it quickly. Hulk." Hulk heard the words, dragging the chain with a ferocious face to end the hatred. And at this moment, the hatred is undergoing strange and unknown changes in the body. The serum injected into its body quickly took effect, fused with the extremely inclusive gamma gene, and then evolved. It twitched all over, screaming in pain, the green color on its body gradually faded, the wounds all over the body gradually healed, and the ugly skin became tougher. After a moment, it knocked Hulk down with a painful movement, and then continued to roll and change rapidly on the ground. Hulk, on the other hand, lost consciousness and lay on the side as if he had been hit hard. "Can you handle it?" Natasha raised her head and asked quite calmly. "I don't know, some things have to be done to know." Lynch slowly lifted into the air, and replied lightly. A trace of haze flashed across Natasha's face. "Liar to you, that guy is a poor copy, how can he compare to me?" Lynch laughed out loud. "I went, so many people are calling for me." After finishing speaking, Lynch flew into the distance with a whimper. Natasha laughed with a hint of worry in the noisy crowd cheering for Lynch. "Make sure nothing happens, Lynn." 15 minutes ago, the Hulk fought the abomination. Hulk was lying on the ground unconscious on his back. Surrounded by heavily armed soldiers, a helicopter in the sky cast a bright light on the twisted and rolling abomination. General Ross continued to deploy the army's next attack with a livid face. Even though the round of fire 1 minute ago seemed to only destroy the ground around the abomination, it did not cause any damage to the abomination. Obviously, the firepower of the previous helicopter can cause a certain amount of damage to the abomination. But now, at this time, General Ross finally recalled the fear of being dominated by Lynch that day. Not to mention the death rays emitted by his eyes, that kind of defense that can't cause any damage with all its firepower is enough to make people desperate. If this monster really has a superhuman body of steel, how to fight it? Missile, biochemical weapon, or a nuclear bomb? This is New York. Besides, is it true that this monster can only be allowed to wreak havoc? In any case, it cannot be allowed to rush into the downtown area again. "Betty, you get out of here first." General Ross wanted to have her escorted away. "Dad?" Betty was unwilling to leave. "Bruce is still there. How are you going to deal with that guy?" General Ross couldn't answer, and motioned his subordinates to take her away with his eyes. "I'm not going." Betty yelled, "I want to be with you." She guessed that this walk might be a farewell to the two of them, and resisted desperately. General Ross couldn't hold back her, so he could only acquiesce. Dang 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 dang. Boom. The soldiers fired again, but this time the abomination began to move. It slowly stood up from the fireworks created by the dense firepower net. Compared with the ugly, ferocious and twisted abomination before, it now has a silver-gray body, tight skin, and a strangely perfect figure. If the previous hatred made people think of chaos and violence at first glance, the current hatred. It's like a god. A soldier couldn't help but have this thought in his heart. But soon, he knew he was wrong. Hatred stood slack, holding his head in both hands and shaking vigorously. It seemed that it couldn't feel the blows coming from all directions, and it was feeling its own body on its own. Suddenly, it leaped tentatively, leaped out more than 10 meters high, and shot towards General Ross like a sharp arrow. It landed with a bang, and there was a burst of gunfire head-on. But it just twisted its body, and then ejected, grabbing Ross in its hands like a chicken. Ross! It had the chance to win, and said mockingly, "Do you regret it now? Give the serum to Hulk. Bronski." A trace of surprise flashed in Rose's eyes, and he blew his beard and snorted coldly, "Do you think you won? Look at your appearance. Monster. Monster." There was thunderous fury in its voice. "If you didn't believe me, how could I be like this?" It squeezed so hard that Rose's face was flushed, but Rose just glared at it without fear. He. It laughed suddenly, and then threw Rose on the ground like trash. "I have to thank you. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have this power." It deliberately slowed down, walked up to General Ross, and whispered softly, "I know you are not afraid of death, so I decided to keep you until the end. I will kill everyone here, Mr. Banner, Ms. Betty, your soldiers." "No." Rose curled up, finally showing panic. "Enjoy, General Ross." It smiled viciously, and moved away from Ross to the soldiers with guns raised. Before the soldier could shoot, he was slapped backwards by the fast-running abomination in panic, spitting blood, and his eyes darkened. Seeing this, the rest of the soldiers fired immediately, but they couldn't hit the lightning-fast abomination at all. And hate why, as the messenger of death, walks among the soldiers, and can easily take the lives of soldiers with every gesture. The soldiers could only watch helplessly as their companions fell to the ground one after another, screaming for signs of losing their lives. Panic gradually permeated the crowd. "No, don't kill me, I surrender." Seeing Abomination running towards him, a soldier dropped his gun and fell to the ground tremblingly. After waiting for a long time, he suddenly raised his head, his face showing the ecstasy of the rest of his life. "Hey!" The world in his eyes suddenly began to spin, and then he saw his own body, headless. "What about your own head?" The smile was forever frozen on his face. "The devil. He's the devil. No, I can't die. My mother is still at home waiting for me to go back." The soldiers completely collapsed and fled for their lives from the battlefield one after another, but they were all chased and killed by the abomination one by one. In just 10 minutes, there was no longer a soldier standing at the scene. Only some citizens who were originally here were ignored by the hatred and hid, and at this moment they were terrified and silently praying. "God, please save us." A conservatively dressed lady suppressed her fear and muttered in a low voice. "Mom, will Iron Man and Superboy come to rescue us?" A 5 or 6-year-old boy asked in the lady's arms with big eyes full of expectation. The lady wiped away the tears from her face, smiled forcefully and said to the child, "Yes, they are already on their way. So we have to hide well and wait for them to rescue us." "Well. Then let's not talk anymore, or we will be discovered later." The little boy said, slid his right hand across his small mouth, and closed his mouth like a zipper. Looking at her lovely and innocent child, the lady couldn't help feeling sad. "God, if you really exist, please save my child. Just this once." If Hate knew what she was thinking, he would definitely scoff at her. "God. It is better to pray to me than to pray to the gods. At this moment, I am God. Ross, are you still alive?" Hate walked towards Rose step by step. Betty crouched beside Ross, drew her gun and shot. "What a nuisance," whispered the abhorrence, running towards Betty. "Hulk strikes." A familiar roar suddenly came from behind the abomination. It was Hulk. It didn't know when it woke up strong again, and when it saw the hatred attacking Betty, its body was filled with strength, and it roared and rushed to stop it. Hatred turned back, facing the astonishing Hulk. He didn't dodge, but just stood there with a mocking face. When Hulk saw that he was about to pat it, it kicked swiftly. Hulk snorted directly, and flew away at a faster speed than when he came. When he fell to the ground, Hulk twitched for a while, and turned back into a naked Banner in a moment. The abomination laughed maniacally, proud that Hulk had been scared away by it. Bang bang bang. "Don't touch Bruce." Betty gritted her teeth and finished firing the bullets in the pistol with red eyes. The hate turned back, enjoying the victory to the fullest. Ignoring Betty's resistance, it scooped her up and lifted her into the air with one hand. Ross, Banner, watch her die, you are all trash. No. Rose stretched out her head and begged desperately, let her go, she is innocent. Hate recklessly strangled Betty, intending to suffocate her to death. Suddenly, Rose, who was pleading, changed his expression and shouted loudly, save her, I was wrong, she is innocent, she is kind. While speaking, he reluctantly pulled out his gun and stuffed it into his mouth. Please, he mouthed and pulled the trigger. Boom. Rose fell to the ground slowly, with regret and pain in his eyes, self-blame, and the last trace of longing. What the hell are you doing? Abomination was completely surprised by General Ross's set of tricks, and it was obvious that the last words were not addressed to it. It pondered General Ross' last words, then woke up with a start. It's that guy. Boom. A roar of a comet crashing into the earth suddenly resounded on Abomination. It was directly knocked down by an attack from nowhere, and Betty in his hand also disappeared. Its two legs are deeply inserted into the ground, and its hands are weakly supporting the ground. It lowers its head and looks from a distance, as if it is paying homage to someone. You're looking for death. Hate looked up at the young boy in front of him, anger and panic bursting out uncontrollably in his heart. Lynch put Betty in his hand aside, and walked slowly to the eyes of the Abomination. He didn't want to get involved in this battle. After all, the hatred was the basket that Ross poked out, and he just let him kill Ross to avenge the last time. Secondly, this matter has nothing to do with Lynch. Lynch doesn't want to act like a social animal, and he doesn't want to start it. Just like in the plot, Hulk should be able to kill the Abomination, each villain will have a corresponding hero role to solve. Unless a villain has a relationship with Lynch, the plot is deflected, and the hero cannot fight, Lynch will take action. Otherwise, there are too many villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, even if he has 10 hands, he can't do it. So he really didn't want to participate in a passionate hand-to-hand fight between two monsters, it was too indecent. However, Ross is worthy of being a boss maker, and he actually made an ability serum with some materials left by him last time, which strengthened his Abomination ability again. In this way, even though Ross was responsible for the death, it was time for Lynch to make a move. First of all, this thing has something to do with me, although it is not out of intention, but after all, the strengthening of hatred has something to do with me. Secondly, this guy is already unstoppable. In the original plot, Hulk killed the Abomination by cheating on the plot. If this wave is strengthened, Hulk, who was weakened into a dog in the movie, can no longer resist the Abomination. If this guy is allowed to kill, I am afraid that with his ability, he can continue to make trouble in New York until dawn. Tony was not in New York on a business trip, and Lynch had to take care of it. After all, it was only December, and New York was destroyed before the plot unfolded. Thirdly, such a powerful abomination that deliberately destroys New York can also provide a considerable amount of justice, and Lynch will naturally not let it go. Passing by General Ross who was dying, Lynch reached out and closed his eyes. Although there was hatred, the dead are the greatest. And he should have also realized his mistake, and he was not afraid of death for the safety of New York. By the time he committed suicide, the hatred had evaporated. In its place is the common goal of destroying the Abomination. Bronski, it's game over. Lynch stood in front of the Abomination and declared indifferently. You have no idea what kind of power I have. The Loathing roared, furious at Lynch's arrogance. Then let me see. Lynch burst out, kicking in the face of hatred. Hate crossed his hands to block it, and was engulfed by a huge force, and flew backwards involuntarily. With one blow, Lynch directly crossed dozens of meters with hatred, hitting a wall. At once. Hating being stepped on the wall by Lynch, he just wanted to say one of his classic lines in disdain. It's your father's old basket. Lynch punched the disgusting ugly face into the wall. I really don't know what to do every day, so it's not over yet. You don't really think you're resistant to beating, do you? Roar. The Abomination was furious, and it seemed that it had dealt a great blow to its spirit before the lines were finished, and an imperceptible green light flashed in its eyes. It struggled frantically, smashed the wall below it, and broke away from Lynch's hands. Lynch observed that a faint green color reappeared on Abomination's body, and the muscle dimension also swelled slightly. Isn't it? Doesn't the Hulk of the Marvel Cinematic Universe have no anger-enhancing power setting? Why is this hatred still exploding? Uncomprehended, Lynch stepped forward and punched. Unexpectedly, Abomination raised his head coldly, dodged the attack, and returned an elbow. Lynch's face turned pale immediately, and he backed away again and again. Hate seized the opportunity and threw another punch, causing Lynch to fly backwards out of control. Fists, legs, head, and hatred beat Lynch crazily like a sandbag. The figures of the two kept moving in the sky and under the ground, destroying everything that blocked them. Suddenly, Lynch stopped in the air and grabbed the fist of the abomination. Hate struck again with another hand, and Lynch caught it again. Immediately, two legs kicked forward, and Lynch kicked back. The two wrestled in the air, competing for strength with their hands, kicking each other fiercely with their legs and feet. With another terrifying kick, Lynch let go of the abomination and quickly lifted into the air. Lynch flew to a height of meters, then squeezed his fists, twisted his neck, and stretched his body. Looking at the abomination that fell below, he was a little depressed. This guy seems really strong. After the passionate physical communication just now, Lynch found that this guy's strength, speed, and even defense were completely inferior to his own. No wonder Hulk was scared by the hammer. But it's also understandable when you think about it, the hatred at the moment is the superpower of 3 superheroes. It originally had Super Soldier Serum similar to the US team, Hulk's Gamma Serum, and Lynch's original part of Superman Serum. Good guy, if you can get all these abilities together, what kind of villain is this? Let me cleanse you and be the protagonist. Is that all you can do? The mocking voice came again, think you're safe in the air. As soon as the words were finished, it squatted deeply, jumped up quickly as if it had been loaded with springs, and went straight to Lynch. Lynch's eyes turned cold, and he also turned to meet the hatred. Seriously, do you really think I'm here? Boom! The two collided violently in the air, and Lynch took advantage of gravity and knocked Abomination to the ground. He pressed the Abomination firmly to the ground, and punched the Abomination's face with his seemingly small fists, cracking the ground continuously. Suddenly, Lynch's eyes burst out with scorching red light, which instantly shot on the chest of Abomination. The fist can only make the hatred feel pain, but it is difficult to cause damage. The only way to try it is to rely on heat vision. Zizizi. The hot eyes didn't penetrate Abomination's body, but made a sizzling sound like roasting meat, and a strange smell of meat filled with a stench immediately permeated the air. Ah! The loathing roared and punched Lynch in the face, sending him flying. It looked extremely angry, and the sound it made faintly became beast-like. Roar! Lynch's eyes were smashed, and he closed his eyes for a while, and the Abomination seized the opportunity to strike. With unstoppable power, the hatred beat Lynch all the way, and he was hundreds of meters away in an instant. With another heavy punch, Lynch was smashed into a building. Abomination followed closely, grabbed Lynch and slammed it hard on the ground, breaking through several floors until it reached the ground. Roar! It pressed Lynch like a demonstration, and roared at Lynch, who was frowning and narrowing his eyes slightly. Lynch coughed suddenly, and spit out a mouthful of bloody saliva on the disgusted face that was close at hand. He opened his eyes and said drowsily, "Do you know you're ugly?" The hatred was furious, and it smashed Lynch's painful face with his big and thick fist. On Lynch's cheek, blood gradually oozed out. Suddenly, Lynch reached out and grabbed the disgusting fist, and it couldn't drop any more. Lynch opened his eyes, gritted his teeth and said, "That's it." He clenched his fists tightly, his veins were exposed, and he punched out. Lynch swung out a fist and hit the hatred on the forehead. Hate was hammered and groaned, and his body fell back weakly. Its heavy body shook the ground, tears and blood flowed across its face. In front of Lynch's eyes, a light curtain that only he could see lit up. Superman System. Current template, Superman 100% in childhood, Superman in youth 20%. Template redemption list, Youth Superman, Superman, Magic Superman, Gold Superman, Supreme Superboy, Silver Superman. Justice value, 185. Just now Lynch turned on the system in an instant and exchanged 10% of the Youth Superman template, and suddenly his strength increased greatly, and he completed the counterattack. Originally, Lynch had 5% of the progress of the template, and after experiencing a riot at the military base, he exchanged for 5%. After Tony's press conference was exposed, and after adding small actions one after another, Lynch exchanged 10% of the template at once, leaving nearly dash. After the battle with the Abomination, the justice value finally increased to more than dash. But before directly exchanging for the 10% template, Lynch wanted to seize this to exercise his fighting ability. Therefore, after finding out the strength of the Abomination, he did not exchange it immediately. Then Lynch was seized by the sudden outburst of hatred. He lost the ability to fight back after a set of combos, so he had to turn on the system and exchange at the speed of light. Is it my turn now? Lynch accelerated and dived from the air, clasped his hands together, and slammed on the chest of Abomination. Dizzy in front of his eyes, the inarticulate Hate raised his head, his eyes protruded like dead fish, and blood spurted from his mouth. Then Lynch dragged the Abomination and swung it like a spinning top, let go gently, and the Abomination was fired like a cannonball, breaking through several walls in a row and disappearing. Lynch followed the trace left by the hatred, and found that it seemed to have changed again. Hate grinned, saliva dripped down continuously, his throat continued to growl, his eyes were blood red, his pupils were so chaotic that he couldn't see his pupils clearly, his body lay on the ground and moved slightly. This is, animalized. Seeing Lynch approaching, it stomped its limbs on the ground, shot towards Lynch in an instant, and slapped it. Much faster again. After catching the palm, Lynch became vigilant, knowing that he couldn't drag it any longer. Lynch no longer kept his hands, his fists reached the limit, and quickly bombarded the whole body of Abomination. Then he locked the hatred that he could not resist with both hands, and soared into the sky. In the air, he threw the hatred into the sky forcefully, and two thick and terrifying rays between his eyes directly penetrated the body of the hatred. I, the strongest. Hate, who was struggling in pain under the hot gaze, suddenly became serious, his falling body stopped abruptly, and two hot gazes also shot out from his eyes. The hot gaze from the hatred collided with Lynch's, and the sudden intense light made the entire night sky look like day. For a moment, people in a radius of several kilometers looked up at the two of them as if they were gods. No, you're a poor copy. Lynch mocked coldly. Go to hell, Bronsky. In an instant, Lynch's eyes widened a third, and a long-supplied energy surged out of his eyes, and the two hot eyes became thicker and more intense, engulfing the hateful hot eyes together with its body. After a long time, Lynch put away his hot gaze, and the figure of hatred was no longer in the air. He closed his scalding eyes and waited for the improvement, the overloaded heat vision would burn his eyes. After staying quietly in the air for a while, Lynch identified the direction through the sound and flew towards the original battlefield. The place has been surrounded by police, medical staff, and reporters. People are being carried away under white cloths, and the noisy and chaotic voices are heard in Lynch's ears, making him inexplicably irritated. He landed slowly from the air, and the people here had already noticed his figure, and when they saw him land, the reporters swarmed up for a while. Superboy, did you kill that monster? What do you think of this incident? Why did you come here so late? Say something. To shut up. Lin Chi clenched his teeth and raised his brows as he roared angrily, and everyone was stunned into silence. Lynch pushed away the crowd in front of him, walked up to the unconscious banner, picked it up and left. Hey, you can't do this. A policeman dissuaded in a low voice. Lynch glanced at him coldly, without speaking. What are you going to do? Betty also came from the ambulance on the side and stopped him with a little hostility. I have no malice, I just want to give him a chance to choose, otherwise he may lose his freedom. Betty fell silent after hearing this. Okay. Lynch nodded, turned around and was about to leave. Superboy. It was the voice of a child. Lynch looked back, and saw a 5 or 6-year-old boy running over without his mother's hand. This is for you, thank you for saving us. He took out a small S badge representing Superman from his arms and handed it to Lynch. Lynch smiled and patted the little boy's head. Thanks, but I'm not Superman. I know, you're a super kid. The little boy had an I understand expression on his face. Well, good boy, go back quickly. It is good. The little boy was overjoyed and ran back to his mother bouncing up and down. Lynch grabbed Banner and took off. Superboy, will you show up next time? Dong dong dong. Come in. Natasha pushed open the door of the roof and walked in. Lynch was lying on a chair, resting his head on his hands, staring at the stars in the night sky. Can't sleep again. Natasha sat beside her and whispered softly. A little. Lynch moved his butt. Natasha glanced at the starry sky, and asked a little curiously. Do you see any difference from ordinary people? Lynch blinked his eyes twice, and replied, it's about the same as ordinary people using binoculars. That's right. Natasha's expression changed, do you have the ability to see through? Lynch was stunned, the super brain was running wildly, Natasha chuckled and said jokingly, okay, I understand. Lynch's face flushed slightly. Heaven and earth conscience. See no evil, as a Chinese man who understands etiquette, how could he do such indecent and shameless things? Unless of course you ask. Lynch's line of sight was slightly deflected. Tired? Natasha suddenly changed the subject. Lynch looked away, and the things he experienced last night seemed to keep appearing in the night sky. Blood, howling, death. The point is that it seems like they're saying it's okay, if I showed up earlier, these seem to be avoidable. Lynch found himself in a strange circle. Subconsciously, he is avoiding participating in the original plot, not only because he is not sure about his ability, but also because he is afraid of affecting the development of the original plot. Because the original plot is one link after another, and each link has its corresponding meaning. But suddenly appearing in this world with superhuman strength, how can he completely avoid participating in the plot? His existence itself affected the original plot. Without him, the abomination would just be killed by the Hulk, not so powerful that it would cause such a tragedy. So what should he do is the right thing to do? Lynch was confused by this. It's okay, just a little confused, don't know what to do. Sometimes, if you can't figure it out, stop thinking about it and follow your inner voice. Natasha's eyes were shining like stars in the sky. Some things, you don't know until you do it, don't you? Yes. Lynch silently glanced at her chest and smiled. That's not it. Natasha pouted, got up and left. Good night. Follow my inner voice. Lynch recalled the cold bodies, the mournful cries of his family, and the little boy's words. Do you want to be a superhero next time? Maybe. Superboy saves New York, what kind of person is he? Demystifying the superhero, Superboy. Superheroes still have ulterior motives. Superboy kicks in. Monster Maker, General Ross' secret plan. Lynch glanced at the newspapers with the same headlines and titles on the newsstand, pressed his hat, and took a Daily Bugle. The incident last night was too noisy, and the news could not be blocked at all. It has already caused an uproar in New York. The abomination had been wiped out by heat sight, and the government made the dead Ross a scapegoat, claiming that the abomination was created by his own dangerous experiments. Superboy has become the center of public opinion through some people's guidance. Everyone was eagerly discussing Superboy, his powerful abilities, why he didn't wear a uniform, his handsome Asian looks, and more. But Lynch found that most of the discussions were positive and irrelevant, and did not talk about where Lynch came from, why he suddenly appeared, and did not even deliberately look for him. You know, based on the ethics of New York reporters, if such an unknown superhuman really appeared, they would definitely swarm like vultures smelling blood, digging 3 feet to dig out all about his identity. Lynch guessed that the SHIELD came forward to prevent these guys from exploring him. Therefore, the reporters praised Superboy for a while in various reports, making Lynch feel ashamed. Their plan is also very clear, they want to use the identity of the Superboy to promote themselves as a superhero. In this way, if there is another moth in Lynch, it is impossible to take action against those who cheered for him, right? But Lynch is also happy to see the results. This war and this wave of publicity have increased his justice value by more than 20. In addition, Lynch also avoided many possible troubles. Unlike Superman, Lynch did not deliberately hide his identity. Speaking of this, Superman is indeed a master at hiding identities among superheroes. The so-called Big Hermit hides in the city. Superman has never covered his head, but he has never been recognized. The explanation given in the comics is that Superman will deliberately camouflage. When he was a reporter in a newspaper, he would pretend to be a cowardly, clumsy, stupid kid through his hairstyle, demeanor, and movements. Coupled with the contrast of Superman's aloof status like a god, ordinary people who saw the newspaper office would only think, this kid looks a lot like Superman. But no one doubts that this ordinary person is a Superman. Lynch was too lazy to make such a disguise. After the battle with the Iron Bully, some blurry images of him have already spread, but the influence is not so good, and the forgetful New Yorkers will almost forget it after a few days. Then, after experiencing the exposure of Tony's press conference, Lynch had to wear a hat and mask when going out. However, Lynch sleeps during the day and haunts at night, plus his 5 senses are sensitive and he moves quickly, so he has never experienced what it is like to be a big star in New York. But after being witnessed by many people and having a huge impact on the hate incident, no one bothers him now because of some relationship, and it is hard to guarantee that there will not be crazy reporters who want to be famous to search for him in the future. This Chinatown, I'm afraid I won't be here for long, many people here have seen him. Lynch leisurely returned to the rooftop. With Rose's death, the hatred was completely wiped out, and Lynch felt a long-lost relief. It is now December 2nd. According to the timeline, the next story in this world is Iron Man, which will not start until next year. In the following time, there will be no villains jumping out to destroy the world, so you can enjoy life with peace of mind. So, where to go? Ask Tony to make a whole house for himself, seems like Stark Tower hasn't been built yet. Or let SHIELD do one, forget it, if SHIELD really gets one for itself, who knows if it will provoke Hydra. Or. Okay. Lynch held up the newspaper in his hand, and he suddenly discovered a piece of information. The owner of the house where the monster first appeared, Dr. Samuel Stern, mysteriously disappeared. Dr. Stern? Mr. Blue? No, it's the boss. Lynch's mind suddenly appeared in the movie, the guy with a swollen head who fell to the ground with a strange smile after creating Abomination. That's right, why did you forget him? In the comics, the Big Boss and the Abomination are one piece of paper and one weapon, and they are both Hulk's deadly enemies. Corresponding to his abhorrence of strong desire to win, this guy's thirst for knowledge is also very strong. He's the same as the Abomination, because Gamma turned into a guy with superpowers. He has strong intuition, computational thinking, information storage, logic and philosophical structure. His intelligence can be said to have almost unlimited potential. Capable of acquiring knowledge and understanding beyond normal human thinking, he is capable of mastering every specialized subject in the world and is fully receptive to concepts outside of his environment. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, although he didn't appear later, he has already left an obvious foreshadowing in the movie. He fell to the ground covered in blood, and the gamma serum flowing out of the shattered instrument touched his head, causing his head to swell strangely. Just like Hulk, the transformation of hatred. In this world, it is not known how many superpowers he has in the comics, but according to the performance in the movie, this character has a very high degree of restoration of the comics. He displayed a keen curiosity and showed no fear of danger. Just because he doesn't appear in subsequent films doesn't mean he hasn't done bad things since. In the comics, after his own head transformation is complete, he assembles a team to steal the world's scientific secrets. This guy is missing. I'm a little careless. Lynch thought silently. For Lynch, this kind of intellectual guy is more difficult to deal with than those villains who rely on force. After all, Lynch, who has redeemed 50% of the Youth Superman template, will not be afraid of a fist-to-head battle. But when it comes to playing tricks and wits, Lynch really can't do it. Gotta find him. If you really want him to hide and develop silently, maybe one day he will jump out and start a plan to destroy mankind. Although he just has a strong thirst for knowledge, there will always be a day when the Earth's technology cannot satisfy him. At that time, will he want to unify the world, eliminate wars and confrontations in all countries, and gather the human, material, and intelligence of the world to develop technology? For such a character who cannot be explained by common sense and is dominated by something, it seems reasonable to make this choice. Thinking of this, Lynch took out his mobile phone and wanted to call Natasha and let SHIELD handle the matter. But after thinking about it, the big boss seems to have a superior IQ and some kind of intuition. If SHIELD handles it, will it scare the snake away? Alas, I have to do it myself. Sensing that there seems to be no one around, Lynch catapults off and flies towards the battlefield that he remembers from yesterday. In a room full of debris. Dr. Stern, or the big boss, was curled up in a corner with a painful expression. His head swelled upwards, looking like a big winter melon from a distance, with blood stains on it, and it was constantly expanding and contracting, like a balloon that was pinched back and forth. This is the basement of his house. When the Abomination ran out of the laboratory, he discovered that he was also mutated by exposure to gamma. He didn't want to be captured by the government, but wanted to explore the changes in himself, so he took advantage of the chaos and hid in this secret basement. More than 10 hours passed, and he realized that an unbelievable change had taken place in himself. Unlike the changes he expected, he did not become a monster like the Hulk and the Abomination, but his brain evolved. He felt that his thinking speed had sped up crazily. Problems that used to take several hours to calculate, now he could come up with the result with a quick turn of his mind. There are also some abilities that he hasn't figured out, and he can't tell what they are without conditional experiments. However, this evolution has not come without a price. His head has grown irreversibly, and his skin is turning the green of the Hulk and the Abomination. At the same time, faster thinking speed means a huge increase in brain energy consumption. As long as he started to think, his head began to ache, and even his body became weaker and weaker. So he could only stop thinking, let go of his thoughts, and force himself to sleep. When the police and others in his home leave, he can go back quietly and think about his next plan. Squeak dash. The sound of the door opening suddenly sounded in the silent basement. He woke up with a start. Then, he saw the figure of a young man. Dr. Stern, are you all right? Lynch observed him and greeted him. Who are you? He sat up against the wall, covered his head and looked at Lynch, and quickly analyzed Lynch's identity and purpose from Lynch's appearance, clothing, demeanor, and movements in his mind. Then came some judgments: confident, vigilant, non-government, know my info. Lynch also guessed something after observing Stern. This guy doesn't seem to be in a good condition. Is it still changing? Do you want to kill him directly? Do you feel any changes in your body? Stern supported his head, and said with some pain and weakness. My brain has mutated and I can think a lot faster. He didn't lie, because he deduced that there was no good fruit for him to lie. This guy obviously has some information about himself, and he showed a killing intent before speaking. He had an intuition that if he lied, he might be in trouble. What's your plan? Lynch said with a smile. Stern was stunned for a moment, and then quickly replied, I want to hide and continue the research on Gamma. Lynch frowned. Is this script wrong with the comics, because of the adaptation of the movie universe, or is he lying? I'm not lying, I just want to do some research, and I don't want to be captured by the government and become their research product. Stern seemed to see through Lynch's thoughts, and added. Can you help me? Lin Chi stared at Stern with his hands propped up, and said, your ability is too strong, and your thirst for knowledge is too strong. How can you guarantee that you won't cause harm to the world in the future? Stern quickly answered, my mutation is not that powerful, I can only maintain my thinking for a short period of time, and then I have to stop due to severe pain. As he said that, he made a painful expression, and then said, I have no interest in this world. I long for knowledge and unknown things. As long as there are things that can be studied, I will not cause harm. Lynch nodded indistinctly. This guy has a strong desire to survive and a high IQ. But there is still the question, if a guy with such a high intelligence is really allowed to absorb knowledge continuously, will he reach a level where he can easily destroy the world in the end? Even if he does not have the will to destroy the world, compared to advanced technology, this world is very fragile, and inadvertent negligence may lead to tragedy. Are you afraid of my evolved brain? Stern spoke out in due course. I don't have a choice, you can't kill me just because I might be a hazard. He looked at Lynch, and suddenly grasped a key piece of information in his memory. Like Superman, it would be foolish for people to suspect him because he's too powerful. Lynch's heart moved slightly, and he looked at Stern with a dangerous gaze. He knew that Stern had already guessed his identity. This is not surprising, after all, he has already had a certain degree of exposure. So what? Lynch wanted to hear how he would convince himself. A strong, outstanding, and extraordinary existence is certainly not a sin, even if it will inevitably be incomprehensible and criticized by ordinary people. Stern said quickly with a painful face. But the truth and the fate of the world have always been in the hands of the few who have always determined the way the world is. It's understandable to restrict and guard against people like me, but why must it be eliminated? After speaking, he seemed to be unable to hold his head and fell down. Lynch frowned and thought for a while. Then he walked slowly in front of Stern and lifted him up a little bit. What you said is very reasonable. The future of mankind is always in the hands of a small number of people, but greatness is born in the ordinary, excellence is highlighted because of the ordinary, and ordinary people are the main body of this world. For their safety, I can only wrong you. Finally, actually, I used to be an ordinary person. As he spoke, Lynch's eyes began to turn red, and an astonishing heat began to radiate. Do not. Stern's face was full of despair, covering his head like a poor big-headed doll. Two terrifying hot lines of sight shot out, piercing through the basement wall. After half an hour, Lynch looked at Stern, who was wearing a funny long hat beside Natasha, and couldn't help laughing. But he held back, after all, it was impolite to laugh at others in public. He said directly to the two, this guy Stern has a mutated brain and a strong thirst for knowledge. You have to observe carefully. Natasha glanced at Stern, said with a slight smile, it's okay, we have experience in this kind of incident, and it happens that we are short of researchers. Lynch hesitated. He didn't kill Stern, after all, this Stern didn't show much harm. The action just now was just his attempt to test whether Stern had hidden his abilities. The result is obvious. I don't know if it's because he's in a bad state and can't use it, or because he has evolved more in this world. Except for the evolution of the brain's thinking speed, he has no other abilities. In this case, the danger of Big Boss has indeed been reduced a lot, so Lynch spared his life. But there is no other place to place him, so he can only be handed over to SHIELD but the famous SHIELD, if one of the Hydras is allowed to come into contact with Dr. Stern. Man, this is a perfect match. So Lynch hesitated whether to reveal in advance that SHIELD has been occupied by Hydra. After thinking for a long time, Lynch felt that it was not the right time, so he had no choice but to say, "As for Dr. Stern, you'd better be like me, and don't let others know. Perhaps, you can tell your chief to ask if there is a Dr. Stern in the plan. Actually, you can tell him yourself that he's been wanting to talk to you face to face." Natasha replied. Lynch pondered for a while, then nodded and said, "Okay, let's set a spot, see you later." Western restaurant. As soon as Lynch entered the door, he was attracted by a shiny bald head. The effect of this head was comparable to that of a navigator. Lynch followed it and walked straight over. Walking to the table, Fury was in a classic black suit, with a blindfold on his face, holding the table with both hands with a serious expression. Natasha on the side was wearing a short skirt, long hair was provocative, and she was leaning on a chair with a relaxed expression. "Hey." Lynch made a sound and sat down opposite. Fury looked at Lynch and greeted in his magnetic voice, "Lynn, we finally meet." Natasha nodded without speaking. Lynch picked up the cup in front of him and took a sip of water, waiting for Fury to continue talking. "I heard you sent us a different scientist." Fry observed his words, and continued. "Yeah, but that guy is more troublesome." Lynch said bluntly. "What's the trouble?" Fury asked. Putting down the cup, Lynch organized his language before replying, "His brain has mutated. In addition to the speed of thinking that has been mentioned, he may also have mental control, enhanced intuition, and telepathy." Hearing this, Fury and Natasha looked at each other. "Not sure." Lynch shook his head. "Can you do it?" "Of course, that's what we do." Fury seemed a little displeased with Lynch's suspicion, and responded in an unquestionable tone. Lynch thought of SHIELD, which had been corrupted by Hydra, and didn't know how to speak, so he could only give him a worried look. Of course Fury could understand this look, and asked a little confused, "Is there any problem?" After hesitating for a while, Lynch had no choice but to give a vague answer, "Director Fury, sometimes don't be too confident in SHIELD. The danger is approaching." Lynch didn't know whether to tell him that SHIELD had been taken over by Hydra. If you don't tell him, S.H.I.E.L.D. may not be so infiltrated at this time, at least it should be better than when it broke out. In theory, the timing of doing it now is better than later. If you tell him, the plot line will be changed accordingly. Who knows if Fury will be directly assassinated by Hydra. After all, the above-board assassination in the movie is not always lucky to survive. What's more, the protagonist of this plot, Captain America, is still frozen in the ice. Without a protagonist who cheats, Fury may not be able to fight against Hydra. Anyway, Lynch thinks this matter is quite hanging. Fury nodded, and then he was a little puzzled. "I know, so I'm working on that plan, you know." Lynch shook his head, indicating that you made a mistake. Fury will finally realize that they don't seem to be talking about the same thing. "What do you mean?" Lynch thought for a while, and asked, "If there is a crisis, S.H.I.E.L.D. may disappear because of it, will you risk a high probability of death to save it?" After asking, Lynch felt that he was talking nonsense. Sure enough, Fury was a little surprised, but immediately said without hesitation, "Of course, I can't let it be destroyed in my hands." "Okay." Lynch stood up. "You choose." He walked to Fury, suddenly reached out and took an invisible headset from his ear, crushing it. "What are you doing?" Fury was puzzled, but he didn't show anger. He knew that if Lynch wanted to deal with him, he didn't need any fancy means. Lynch moved closer to the two of them and said in a low voice, "The enemy is inside." Fury's eyes became sharp instantly, and he stared at Lynch and asked in a low voice, "You mean, there are enemies lurking in SHIELD? Lynch returned a strange look, and then continued. "No, it should be said that SHIELD has been occupied, you have to be careful." After speaking, Lynch walked back to his place. Fury on the opposite side quickly restrained his surprise, and his face returned to normal. He dismissed the conversation just now as if it didn't happen, and changed the subject and asked, "How's the time going?" Lynch glanced at him, thinking that you really know how to ask questions. "It's okay, but you should know better than myself." "That's good, how are you getting on with Natasha?" Lynch, who was somewhat inexplicable, glanced at Natasha and replied, "It's not bad, so Natasha won't go out to do missions anymore." Without much thought, Fury promised, "If you want to." Lynch smiled, but did not respond. Fury, who understood Lynch's meaning, then asked, "What are your plans for the future?" "Plan?" Lynch said with an expression of, "You can pull it down," and said unhappily, didn't you plan for me, superhero, Superboy? Fury shook his head, as if he didn't agree with Lynch's statement. It's your own choice. Well, then I don't have to make the same choice next time. Fury was silent for a moment. After thinking about it, Lynch still answered, I plan to live in Hell's Kitchen for a while. Hell's Kitchen? Fury didn't seem familiar, the one in Manhattan. Yes. So do you need anything? Like money, or a house? No. Lynch shook his head, I can solve this, and I will tell Natasha if necessary. It is good. Fred paused. Do you think that Dr. Stern can join that project? He asked tentatively. Lynch's eyes moved slightly, and he got to the point. I don't know, I just think maybe you need it. Fury continued to ask, I want to hear your opinion on that plan. Lynch looked at Fury, and classic scenes appeared in his mind. During the Great War in New York, the Avengers gathered and were instigated by Loki to split, and finally fought side by side against the Chitauri army that fell from the sky. Ultron destroys the world, and the Avengers joins new faces to fight against artificial intelligence and smash the fallen continent. Thanos came, the Avengers ended in a disastrous defeat, half of the universe was wiped out, and the heroes scattered. In the final battle, the Avengers regrouped to face the enemies that came across time and saved half of the lost lives. What do you think of the Avengers? Without the Avengers, what's left of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Of course you have to call it a visionary plan. Lynch answered matter-of-factly. Even if your possible enemy now is me, I have to say, this plan is great. Lynch shrugged and said indifferently. Oh. Fury was a little surprised. Are you so sure? Of course. Lynch looked confident, this may be the most correct decision you have ever made in your life. When Fury heard this, his face was a little weird, but he didn't say much. Okay, I'm leaving first, let's talk about it next time we meet. Lynch felt that the conversation was almost over, and got up to leave. Let me see you off. Natasha also stood up. The two came to the door and stood still. Natasha asked Lynch, what do you think of Director Fury? Is there any difference from your impression? Lynch smiled and said to Natasha, it's about the same, the aura is quite strong. Natasha also laughed and said goodbye to Lynch, when you move home, find a place to buy me a drink. It is good. Hell's Kitchen is located on the west bank of Manhattan, New York City. Its official name is Clinton. It used to be a slum in the early years, so it has long been synonymous with crime and evil. And the Hell's Kitchen of the Marvel Universe can be called the top tourist attraction in the Marvel Universe. The small Hell's Kitchen gathers superheroes and supervillains from all over the world, and it can be called the most dazzling pearl in New York, the capital of crime. In Hell's Kitchen, you can find but not limited to the following Marvel heroes. The iconic character of Hell's Kitchen, Daredevil. He was blinded by exposure to radioactive chemicals in his eyes when he was a child, but he gained hearing and physical coordination beyond ordinary people. He is a vigilante who wanders in the night at night, and is called the Devil from Hell by some people. But during the day, he's a blind lawyer named Matt Murdock, with whom he can chat lightheartedly on the grounds of consulting legal issues. In addition, there is Luke Cage, a street fighter in Harlem not far from Hell's Kitchen. He was a muscular black man who had wandered around the streets since he was a child, and was finally framed and sent to prison one day. In order to reduce his sentence, he voluntarily participated in a certain military experiment project, and gained great strength and an invulnerable body. After he was released from prison, he began to defend the interests of his fellow citizens and ensure the safety of the neighborhood. He was called a Harlem hero. Then there is Jessica Jones, a petite girl with black hair and brown eyes, who always wears a three-piece suit of denim jeans and boots. There is also the last member of the Hell's Kitchen Defenders League, a Chinese-style hero named Iron Fist, who was born as a billionaire. When the plane crashed during a family outing, he fell alone in Kunlun and survived. After that, he practiced Qi in Kunlun, defeated Shou Lao, and won the title of Iron Fist. Then he returned to New York, killed the relatives who killed the whole family, and fought against the evil organization Hand Peace. In addition, there is also the famous anti-hero Punisher. Experts suggest that the first time you see Uncle Punisher, please, run. Don't hesitate, you may die if you hesitate. Of course, heroes always correspond to villains, and Hell's Kitchen also has many supervillains, including but not limited to Hell's Kitchen Gang King, Devil Muscle, while fighting against Daredevil, the Punisher, and even Spider-Man, Wilson Fisk, Kingpin. Jean Bing's men are mentally disturbed and have a strange projection ability. Bullseye. A pervert who has the ability to control the mind and loves to control the play, the Purple Man. Such a place with outstanding people and unique scenery is a good time to visit at night, and you can experience the original taste of Hell's Kitchen in some humble small bars. Dim and flickering colorful lights, chaotic and restless voices, weaving through the crowd, gorgeous, heavy makeup, dancers exuding the smell of cheap perfume, and gangsters with snakes and tigers, big arms and round waists, constantly spouting charming fragrances from their mouths, authentic black slang gangsters. Just like the one in front of Lynch. He was muscular, with a flushed face, cursing and stretching out his unclean-looking right hand to Lynch in the seat. There is no contradiction, it is probably just a drunk who wants to find someone to bully, to vent the negative emotions accumulated in his heart. It just so happened that Lynch, who was young and handsome and the face of the most bullied Asian in my impression, plus the clothes and accessories, was a bit out of tune with the atmosphere here, sitting not far from him. What can Lynch do? He decided to do as the Romans do, using the rules of Hell's Kitchen. Pinching the guy's outstretched finger, Lynch twisted it in disgust. The big guy yelled in pain, and even the alcohol was 3 points away, and he kicked over in a panic. Lynch got up, grabbed his foot and threw it lightly. The big man drew a parabola in the air, smashed the bar door, and lay down on the road outside. After clapping their hands, after Lynch sat down, the surrounding air suddenly became much quieter. Those malicious ridicules and peeps were restrained a lot for a while. Lynch adjusted the sunglasses on his face, took a sip of Coke, feeling a bit dull. It's been 2 days since I've been in Hell's Kitchen, but Lynch has yet to spot a superhero or interesting villain. They are all stupid and blind little guys, and it is very annoying for Lynch to deal with them. The drunk man outside got up in a daze, and walked away while cursing bitterly. Lynch originally wanted to leave, but when he heard that he didn't seem particularly convinced, he planned to go back and ask someone to clean him up, so he sat down again. How could it be possible not to cause trouble in Hell's Kitchen? Of course, the bigger the better. After 15 minutes, Lynch drank the Coke in the glass in one gulp and walked out. Outside, the drunk led 3 or 4 companions to block them aggressively. It's this kid. The drunk man panted, pointed at Lynch with hatred and said. The leader was neither tall nor strong, but he looked fierce. Mousy gang. Lynch said to himself, these guys have very obvious physical signs. You're screwed, boy. Without much nonsense, Mao Zi, the leader, directly took out a tubular object and rushed forward at the first, followed by the people behind him. Lynch twisted his neck and stood still. Facing several big men with murder weapons, he just dodged lightly, and then punched hard. After a while, several people fell to the ground. Fuck, don't come here. The drunk man was already fully awake. Seeing Lynch walking slowly, who seemed to be smiling but not smiling, he threatened sternly. It's okay, my hands are fast, you will only feel the pain for a moment. With a sincere face, Lynch stretched out a white and tender fist to him. Go to hell. Unexpectedly, this guy seemed to think that Lynch was going to kill him, so he took out a small pistol with a grim face, raised the gun and shot. Bang bang bang. The loud gunshots echoed in the night sky, startling a few birds resting on the street lamp. Other than that, it doesn't work. Lynch's face became stern, and he spread his palms, and distorted bullets fell from his palms one after another. The drunk looked at Lynch in disbelief, and choked out the words monster and devil. Then he collapsed to the ground like a bubble of excrement, and his crotch gradually became wet. Glancing at him in disgust, Lynch ended his nightmare tonight. Then slowly, Lynch left here before the onlookers arrived. After walking for more than 10 minutes, when passing a street light, Lynch suddenly turned his head and looked behind him. What's the matter with you? He spoke quietly, and said to a figure who was frightened and wanted to hide behind the street lamp. Under the streetlight, hearing Lynch's words, the figure hiding behind the streetlight trembled. Then she slowly poked her head out to look at Lynch, and then walked out. Is a beautiful young woman. She is in her 20s, with blonde hair and blue pupils, big eyes and a high nose, fair skin, and a plump figure. She is a standard European and American hot girl. Under the light, she looked haggard, her hair was a little disheveled, and she showed obvious anxiety and fear in her gestures. These are not the point is. Lynch knew her. What's the matter? Is there anything I can do for you? Lynch smiled, trying to make the most of his youthful good looks to express his friendliness. She lowered her head, hesitated to speak with a frightened expression, but after saying a word, she struggled not knowing how to proceed. It's okay, you can speak slowly, can you tell me your name first? Lynch guided her while guessing her situation. Now she replied, my name is. You can call me Karen. Karen. Lynch thought to himself that he was right. Okay, my name is Lynn. Have you encountered any difficulties? Lynch walked towards Karen while talking. No. Thank you, I still can't say. Unexpectedly, Karen seemed to be in a very bad state of mind at the moment. When she noticed Lynch's approach, she turned her head and ran away like a frightened deer. Lynch didn't catch up, and stood there watching her running back, thinking of a name in his heart. Karen Page. Karen ran all the way back home, sitting in the doorway gasping for breath, as if she had just escaped death. During this time, she has been in anxiety and panic. Because she seriously suspected that she had been being watched, and someone even wanted to kill her. This is by no means persecution paranoia, but has grounds and reasons. She suspects that she has discovered the boss's secret, so she will be killed by the boss to silence her. Not long ago, when she was reporting to her boss, as an accountant of the company, she accidentally overheard the boss's call outside the door, and thus found that the company's accounts had serious problems. Out of curiosity, she launched a series of investigations and preserved the information. Soon, the boss found her for a conversation, but she lied and dealt with it when she realized something was wrong. After the conversation, she stopped the investigation and sealed the information. The reason is simple, she just wants to make money to live, and doesn't want to get into any trouble. However, she who thought the matter was over, gradually realized something was wrong. In the company, on the way home, or even lying at home, she felt like she was being watched. Just tonight, she boldly ran out of the house to see if someone was really watching her, and she really found a disappearing figure. This made her anxiety and fear to the extreme. She dared not stay at home any longer, and hurried to a crowded place. Walking on the street, she wanted to call the police, but after thinking for a long time, she gave up this plan. She didn't know how to tell the police. Should she show those materials to testify against the boss? There's no need for that. She's not a cop, she's not a superhero, she's just a woman who can barely support herself. After walking around the street, she still didn't dare to go home, and then saw Lynch dealing with those guys from a distance. At that time, Karen didn't know why, but a crazy idea came to her mind. He is so powerful, he should be able to help me, right? She was so frightened. Meeting Lynch was like a drowning man who saw a life-saving straw and wanted to grab it. So, she quietly followed Lynch. But after following Lynch for a long time, she didn't dare to speak. How should I tell him? My boss wants to kill himself, can you protect me? Who would believe it? Why should he help me? And who knows if he's a bad guy? While hesitating, Karen heard Lynch's words, and was so frightened that she quickly hid behind the streetlight on the side of the road. Looking at Lynch's younger face than her own, Karen felt that she was really crazy. How could she come up with such a bad idea? Just find someone on the street to protect yourself. So, she ran all the way back home. Sitting at the door, she kept comforting herself. It's okay, Peggy, I will confess to my boss tomorrow, nothing will happen. At this moment, Karen suddenly heard a small voice. Karen knew it was from an inconspicuous piece of iron in the aisle. In the aisle at night, the lights are dim. If you are not very familiar with it, you have a high chance of encountering that thing. She couldn't help covering her mouth, with a terrified expression on her face. Someone is coming. Not the residents here, but people outside the residence. She lay down slowly, with her ear to the ground, and prayed that a mouse or a cat had touched the thing. Then she heard slow, heavy footsteps. Boom, boom, boom. Like death's bell. Karen bit her lip tightly, tears streaming down her face. Is someone coming to kill me? The rhythmic footsteps approached little by little, and then stopped. Is he here? Karen got up and looked through the doorway. Under the orange light, there seemed to be no one in front of the door. Karen calmed down a little, and felt that she was a little paranoid. At this moment, the narrow doorway was suddenly blocked by a fierce face. Immediately there was a sound of mechanical turning of the door lock. Under Karen's horrified gaze, the door slowly opened. No! Karen screamed and ran towards the room, but it was obvious that the malevolent man moved faster. He rushed up and held Karen down, stuffing something into her mouth with his gloved hand to keep her from screaming. Then he grabbed Karen's struggling hands with his left hand, pressed her back with his knees, and quickly drew a silenced pistol from his waist with his right hand and pointed it at Karen's head. Oh! Don't kill me! Karen struggled with all her strength, whining hysterically. She was desperate, and at the same time couldn't help but start to regret it. She regretted why she had to meddle in other people's business. She was obviously an insignificant employee, so why did she want to investigate these shitty things? She regretted not telling the truth just now to the person who had shown her kindness and asked her if she needed help. She regrets that she has not had time to do many things. But it was too late. Did my life end like this? Karen closed her eyes in despair. After a long time, Karen suddenly opened her eyes. She broke away from the killer who was pressing on her, and found with a look of surprise that she seemed to have survived. With doubts, she looked up, and in the blur, she saw a slightly familiar face. Forrest. Forrest. Karen exclaimed. Shoo. Lynch put his finger over his mouth, motioning for Karen to be quiet. Karen glanced at the killer who was lying on the ground. He nodded rationally to express his understanding. I'm here to help you, don't make a sound, close the door and we'll talk again. With that said, Lynch gently closed the door. The two left the killer where they were, and went back to the bedroom to sit down. Who exactly are you? Karen couldn't help but speak first, with the joy and doubts of the rest of her life on her face. She didn't understand why Lynch appeared here by such a coincidence, just to save her. Is it just because they looked at each other under the streetlight? Lynch pondered for a moment. I am a good person. Good person. Karen was stunned, just because of kindness. Facing Karen's suspicious eyes, Lynch decided to show his cards. Well, I have a nickname, Superboy. Who? Karen was dazed. A superhero, haven't you heard of it? Lynch blushed. After all, not everyone had Tony's thick skin that boasted that he could protect the world. Do not. Karen shook her head and said with some uncertainty. Should I know? Lynch took a deep breath, decided not to talk nonsense, and showed it directly. If you are surprised, please don't scream. Karen nodded hesitantly, then sat back in silence. Lynch almost spit out a mouthful of old blood. Do I look like a weird person? Like. Indeed a little. If someone tells me that he is an ultra-warrior with a strange name from the Kingdom of Light in the M78 Nebula, I will probably stay away from him. No wonder, I'm a man who believes in light. Lynch thought wildly and took out a cigarette from his body. With the cigarette in his hand, Lynch's eyes slowly brightened, and two small hot eyesights precisely hit the cigarette butt. In an instant, the cigarette butt flashed and began to burn. Putting away his thermal vision, stuffing the cigarette into his mouth, and taking a light puff, Lynch's body in a sitting position gradually floated up again. Karen stared, her jaw dropping in shock. Is this magic? Karen couldn't believe it. No, I can fly and emit rays. For a show? No. It's used to destroy the enemy. Didn't you read the news a while ago? I killed that monster in Brooklyn. Lynch felt helpless. Karen seemed to finally recall some big news before, so she looked at Lynch in surprise and said, Are you that little Superman? Lynch was silent for a moment. Yes, I am. Now can you tell me what happened to you? Karen thought for a moment, then slowly began to speak. After 10 minutes, Karen stopped talking, and Lynch rested his chin in thought. Karen Peggy was Lynch's favorite woman in the Marvel Universe in her previous life. The degree of love is second only to Natasha, Wanda, Jessica, Carter, and so on. She appeared in the Daredevil episode of the Marvel Universe. She was framed to kill her colleague because she discovered criminal evidence about Jean Bin. She was rescued by Daredevil Matt and later became an assistant in Matt's law firm. She has good looks and a good figure. She had a relationship with Matt. After Matt disappeared and was considered dead, she has been paying the rent of Matt's apartment for him. But they don't end well, as Erica, Matt's ex-girlfriend, returns later in the episode. What is this wave called? This is called the predecessor, the incumbent must lose. After suffering the hardships of life and the hardships of love, she is really a miserable woman. The current situation is that the plot is similar and different from the original one, but it should be certain that this matter has nothing to do with Jean. If you think about it, you can know that Kim claims to be related to 40% of the criminal activities in the United States. Hell's Kitchen has something bad, so it has nothing to do with Kim. If you want to help her solve the problem, you must have a touch with Kim. Help, I definitely want to help. After all, I see a beautiful woman who I still feel sorry for being persecuted and assassinated by the evil forces, no matter how worthy of my own system. Touch, must also touch. After all, come to Hell's Kitchen, can't you touch the ultimate villain of Hell's Kitchen? But how to help and how to touch still needs to be thought about. It is impossible to fly directly to Jean Bing's house and be roasted to death by 2 heat lines. Because in Lynch's impression, Jean Bing is a relatively safe supervillain. According to the game camp, he probably looks lawful and evil. He is not like other supervillains who are ready to destroy the world at every turn. Instead, he focuses on the development of his own criminal career and fights against various superheroes for this. In some ways, he is the one who maintains some order, while the superhero is the one who creates chaos. As dark as this order is, poor order is better than chaos. He had an unfortunate childhood. When he was a child, his father often punched the mother and son. Later, he also had a happy family, a cherished lover and children, and had a destination. He has the strongest strength among ordinary people, and his seemingly obese body is actually basically muscle. He also relied on this terrifying muscle, leaving a good record such as fighting with Spider-Man and defeating the US team. And all of this was achieved through his hard work, punch by punch. In this way, he is more inspirational than many superheroes who suddenly gain superpowers. After all, not everyone has the luck to mutate, and not everyone has the money to play tech. But hard work is something that everyone can do, and Wilson Fisk is one of the best, a perfect example of ordinary people's counterattack. Of course, this is not to encourage everyone to be young and dangerous, to commit crimes, but this spirit of struggle, hard work is worth learning. So Lynch thinks that to treat such a character, destroying his body so easily is too insulting to his efforts. How to fight Gene Bin? You have to mention Daredevil Matt Murdock. He belongs to the other side of Gene Bin. Although he lived in poverty when he was a child, his father left him many precious things. He suffered an accident when he was a child, he was blind in both eyes, his hearing was developed, his physical coordination was enhanced, and he gained impressive strength through hard training. After his father was murdered, he studied hard, was admitted to Columbia University, and became a lawyer. He used the law to fight crime during the day, and turned into a demon to punish crime at night. He has been a bohemian all his life, has many girlfriends but has no destination. He and Gene are deadly enemies. Gene is not only his father-killing enemy, but also the source of evil. So to deal with Gene Bin, you must bring Daredevil. The point is, how to find him. Lynch pondered for a long time before telling Karen, go to the police tomorrow and say that you were murdered last night and a man in black saved you. Karen asked, puzzled, why? What if they asked me why I was murdered? You just say you don't know anything. Lynch continued, afterwards, if a blind lawyer named Matt Murdock asks you for questioning, you tell him that I will wait for the devil in Hell's Kitchen outside the police station. Karen nodded hesitantly. Then you rest first, I'll go first. With that said, Lynch was about to run away. Forest. Karen took Lynch's hand. There are dead bodies in the house. I'm afraid, can you stay? Lynch frowned. Okay, I'll sleep on the floor, do you still have a quilt? Yes, I'll get it for you. In the darkness, there was a rustling sound on the bed. After a while, Lynch felt a warm body inside the quilt. What are you doing? Halfway through the speech, it turned into a whining sound. After a while, it turned into a mesmerized mourning sound. Miss Karen Page, let me ask you again, are you hiding anything about what happened last night? In the police station, a white policeman held a small table with his hands and said to Karen with a serious expression. Karen looked slightly nervous, but she was much better than last night. She chose to believe in Lynch, so she vetoed. No, I've said it many times. I was sleeping yesterday. Someone was going to kill me. A man in black saved me. I knew so much last night. Can you help me find a lawyer? The white policeman looked at another black policeman and walked out. At the door, the black policeman said to another, do you think she lied? Another white policeman nodded, put away his sharp eyes, and said in a positive tone. She must have concealed something. Why was she murdered? Who saved her? She probably knows all of this. She is too calm, and she doesn't look like someone who has just been murdered and knows nothing. Yeah. The black policeman interjected, but the dead man is indeed dressed as a killer, suppressed pistol, night suit, gloves. I feel like we have a problem. He shook his head and was silent for a while. I'll go find a lawyer first. The black policeman turned his head and walked away, while the white policeman who was standing still looked at Karen in the interrogation room, his eyes gradually turned cold. Fudge, fudge, fudge. A phone rang, waking up the sleeping man on the bed. He followed the sound, reached for the phone, and answered the call. Hey. Morning, handsome guy. A laugh came from the other end of the phone. What time is it? He rubbed his head, his face was bruised. You should get up, we have work today. The person on the other side of the phone reminded. What's wrong? He moved his body, not knowing which wound he touched, and grinned softly. What's that sound? Matt? Is there someone else in your bed? The tone of the person on the other side of the phone became cheerful. Let me guess who, the paralegal? Never mind, I don't want to know. Matt got up, with bruises scattered on his strong muscles, with a smile on his face, and he didn't refute what his good friend Fudge said. He didn't want his good friend to know what he was doing at night. For Fudge, a misunderstanding was far safer than the truth. Come on, Fudge, let's talk about the case you mentioned. Matt reluctantly changed the subject. Well, she's a poor beauty. Fudge on the other end of the phone was a short, overweight man. While speaking, he turned his head, opened the blinds of the interrogation room, and looked up and down at Karen sitting inside. Can you promise me one thing? Fudge smiled. What? Take off your damn charm when you're talking to her. Oh. She's beautiful. Matt laughed. Yes. Fudge joked half-truthfully, seeing her makes me feel young again. Okay. Matt smiled and began to wash up. Can we talk about the case now? She was murdered in her home by what appeared to be a professional killer, said Fudge in a slightly low voice. What? Matt frowned. What happened later? Why did the professional killer fail? This is the strange part. Fudge's tone was puzzled. She claimed that a man in black saved her. Man in black? The movement of Matt's hand stopped, and his face was surprised. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Karen Page. Karen looked up and saw two men in neat suits walking in. One is wearing sunglasses and has a cane in his hand, the other is short and stout, holding documents. Yes, you are. My name is Matt Murdock, and this is my colleague Foggy Nelson. Can we sit down? Karen's eyes lit up and she nodded. She nodded. Let's sit down. Fudge reminded Matt. The two sat down, and Matt spoke first. You claim that you were murdered and a man in black saved you. Is that true? Karen glanced at Matt, who was wearing sunglasses, and replied calmly, yes. Hearing this, Matt's expressionless face became more intriguing. Because he heard it, the woman was lying. You don't have to worry about anything, we are your lawyers, you can tell us everything you know so we can help you. Matt said in a solemn tone. He thought Karen was afraid to tell the truth. That's the truth. Karen answered right away, without hesitation. Or lie. Matt thought for a moment and decided to ask the question differently. So, do you know why you were murdered? Karen shook her head. Do not know. Another lie. Does the man in black really exist? Karen paused briefly before saying, yes. Matt paused for a moment and said nothing. Lies, but there seems to be real information out there. Matt finally found a breakthrough. When he heard the man in black, he couldn't help but associate it with himself. But Matt knew what he did. He didn't help a murdered woman yesterday. So, is this a coincidence? Or has the recent frequent actions caught someone's attention? Matt didn't know, but if he continued to ask, he would definitely find something interesting. Do you know the man in black? He continued to ask. No, I don't know. She knew the man who rescued her. Matt became a little alarmed. Could it be a trap? But this trap is too complicated. If they knew who they were, why bother? So, what happened to this lady? She knew why she was murdered, and she knew the man who saved her, so why call the police? Could it be that the person who saved her in front of a well-prepared killer with a gun in hand couldn't dispose of the killer's body? In this way, there is no trouble, why call the police? He was confused, because his instinct told him that this woman was not a villain with a plan. She is more like an ordinary person who has suddenly come into contact with the untouchable darkness. Matt has seen many of these people. A person who used to lead a normal life ruined his entire life because of exposure to those dark worlds. This is not uncommon in Hell's Kitchen. Matt wanted to help her, of course, after making sure she was all right. Are you really innocent? Matt raised his head and asked solemnly. Yes. Karen replied with a clear face. It's finally the truth. Matt breathed a sigh of relief. Then we can move on. Actually, that person asked me to tell you something. Who? The man in black I was talking about. What? What did he say? He said he'd be waiting for the Hell's Kitchen demon at the gate of the police station. He said, would be waiting outside the police station for the demons in Hell's Kitchen. Hearing this, Matt froze. Because of him, Matt Murdock, Daredevil, he was called the Demon of Hell's Kitchen by some people in Hell's Kitchen. This is no longer a name-calling, but almost reading his ID number directly. Who is waiting for him outside the police station? What is his purpose? Without thinking for long, Matt stood up. He was not afraid, but wanted to find out. After all, Daredevil is also called Daredevil. His name actually means reckless, bold, not afraid of death. Okay, I'll discuss it with my colleagues. Matt drags Fudge out of the interrogation room. What did this person say? Why can't I understand anything? Fudge complained with a depressed face. Noticing Matt's silence, he was familiar with Matt and asked questioningly, Matt, tell me, you won't really go to the police station to see if there is a man in black? I can. Matt nodded to Fudge's disappointed gaze. I have to collect some intelligence, you stay here and watch her, I'll be back soon. After speaking, without giving Fudge time to react, Matt turned his head and left. The devil in Hell's Kitchen. Looking at Matt's figure, Fudge smiled inwardly. Who would use such a funny nickname? An actor from a troupe. Matt came to the gate of the police station and stood quietly with his head raised. It looks like he's basking in the sun, but he's actually listening. The entrance of the police station is a road with a constant flow of vehicles and pedestrians. The sounds constantly coming from all around were captured by his super hearing, and gathered in his mind to form a radar-like image. This is his power, like a bat, his hearing is his sight, and his sound is his image. Of course, such images can be tricked. Just like now. Hey, Matt, I've been waiting for you for a long time. A voice suddenly came from his left, but there was no image of the source of the voice in his mind. There is no sound of breathing, no sound of blood flowing, no sound of heart beating. Even the reaction of various sounds spreading to the person who made the sound, the air blowing over the sound of the person who made the sound. None exist. In Matt Murdock's world, the man just doesn't exist. Or rather, ghosts, or something else. Matt showed shock, and asked in the direction of the voice, what are you? Lynch smiled, and immediately released his life stance. Daredevil's abilities are completely suppressed by him. His superpowers lie in his super hearing and keen sense of smell. And Superman's life force field can control the spread of surrounding sounds, making himself disappear out of thin air, in front of Daredevil. To Lynch, Daredevil is a real blind man. However, he just scratched his head, wanting to see Daredevil's surprised expression and take the initiative to meet for the first time. My name is Lynn, can you feel me now? Lynch said with a smile. In Matt's mind, the general figure of Lynch finally formed. But, are you human? Or something? Matt questioned, still in shock. His super hearing can hear the strength of Lynch's body. That strong and powerful heart, that blood as heavy as mercury. This is not something a normal person can show at all. Yes, do you remember the big news in Brooklyn some time ago? Remember, you are that superhero. As a lawyer, Matt, who is familiar with all kinds of hot news, finally understood. Yes, let's talk in another place. Cafe. Lynch kept staring at Matt, who had calmed down, so that Matt, who noticed this, couldn't help frowning. Lynch, who had no idea about men, saw nothing strange about him. The main reason is that I was surprised by his appearance, he is too similar to the Zhenglian version of the Master. Originally, Lynch thought that according to the direction of the plot, this Daredevil should be like the drama version of Daredevil. But only after meeting him did he realize that he was more like the one in the movie version. The similarity is certain, after all, the actors of Zhenglian Batman and Daredevil are the same person. Can Lynch, who is equipped with a Superman system, not be excited to see the Master in the Marvel Universe? Lynch could not wait to hold the Master's hand and shout, Master, I am suffering here. Too bad Daredevil isn't Batman, even though they share so many similarities. Counting with fingers, the two of them are basically ordinary people. They lost their parents when they were young, and gained a good strength through their own unremitting efforts. If both of them are considered to have superpowers, Batman may have the closeness of bats, while Daredevil has the ability of ultrasonic waves similar to bats. Both of them have the principle of not killing. Batman believes that unrestrained violence cannot bring peace, Daredevil believes in Catholicism and believes that no one in this world has the right to judge others, so he cannot deprive others of their lives at will. I won't say much about other uniforms, story tone, etc. I understand everything, and the similarity is very high. So, what's the matter? Matt spoke first, because he felt that Lynch was a little unreliable. Although, he has recognized Lynch's identity. Karen discovers a secret and someone wants her dead because of it. Lynch told the whole thing clearly and simply. Matt was not very surprised, and continued to ask, whose secret? Lynch looked around, and his voice dropped, have you heard of Gene Bin? Matt turned his head, a little surprised. I know him, the gangster king of Hell's Kitchen. Lynch hummed. It seems that Daredevil already knows Gene Bin by this time. Then you should know that he is the one you have been fighting against. Matt looked up and was silent for a while. Right. After a little thought, he can understand that he has been fighting against evil, and his biggest enemy is of course Jin Bin, the source of evil in Hell's Kitchen. Behind this incident, there is likely to be his figure. Lynch said word by word. Are you sure? Matt frowned. I can hear better than you, Matt, and I can see as well as I can hear. Lynch boasted calmly. Okay, so what do you want to do? Matt asked with interest. Fighting crime had always interested him. Leaning forward, Lynch talked eloquently. Help Karen obtain key evidence, then sue Jin Bin and imprison him for several years. Matt heard this, shaking his head slowly with a dignified expression. Things are not that simple. I know, Hell's Kitchen is full of his people, he's the master of the place. Lynch interrupted him. So I came to you, you know Hell's Kitchen well, don't you? Leaning back, Lynch's eyes drifted to the distance, and he began to explain in a faint tone. You and he are natural enemies. He took away the most important people in you, and will continue to take away those around you. If you don't make up your mind to deal with him earlier, abandon your activities. What do you mean? Matt was puzzled. Perhaps you have found out that your father was murdered because he didn't cooperate with punching fake punches. That person was Jin Bing's subordinate. Lynch stared at Matt, speaking word by word. What? Matt finally changed his face. His father's death was a great blow to him. He will never forget the memory of such a strong, tenacious person who guides his progress and growth in a world where he cannot see the light, lying in his arms, without a sound or a cold body. Are you sure? Matt's voice sounded cold and depressed. Like the devil in Hell's Kitchen. Yes. Lynch answered briefly. In front of Daredevil, there is no need to explain too much, and there is nothing to hide whether it is true or false. Go and get Karen out of the police station. There may be people from Jin Bin in the police station. I will go find you. Matt acquiesced blankly, then got up quickly. Then what are you doing all this for? Before leaving, he asked Lynch coldly. For some fun. Lynch replied with a smile. I thought you'd say justice. Daredevil smiled coldly, turned and left. Matt. What's wrong with you? Seeing Matt walking quickly with a gloomy face, Fudge asked worriedly. It's nothing. I figured this out, let's get Karen out of the police station first. Matt calmed down his emotions, and took Fudge to find someone. My client is not under any suspicion, why can't he leave? Matt had no expression on his face, and put pressure on the two policemen opposite him in a cold tone. Currently the case is still unclear, Karen needs to stay and cooperate with the investigation. The white policeman looked businesslike and didn't show any sympathy for Matt. I'll let Karen keep in touch, and she will arrive as soon as the police station needs to cooperate. Matt continued to fight. No, she has to stay here. The white policeman told Matt with an unquestionable expression and tone. You have no reason to detain her. Matt grumbled. Right. The white policeman was angry, pointed to the floor and said, but this is the police station, I have the final say. You have no right to dictate here. So you have to wait until the detention time is up to let Karen go. Matt continued to question without fear. This is my power. The white policeman stares, do you have an opinion? I haven't. But I can't guarantee that my lovely client won't go on some talk show complaining about being detained without reason. Matt threw his face up, threatening without emotion. Fact squid. The white policeman stood up, and the black policeman next to him pulled him. He pointed at Matt and yelled, don't think you're blind and I won't smash your face with my fist. Be careful. After speaking, he walked away angrily. What does this mean? Fudge asked the remaining black policeman dissatisfied. Fudge, just keep your mouth shut. He also stood up a little unhappily, he's not like this usually, I'll go and see what's going on. The two remaining people looked at each other in dismay. It seems that your bribe is of no use. Matt stabs Fudge. Fudge immediately spread his hands and said helplessly, who knows what's wrong with that guy? I must complain to him. Matt turned his face to the direction the police were leaving, and remained silent. Maybe, he has a little problem. Brown, what's the matter with you today? The black policeman walked up to the white policeman and asked suspiciously. Brown was smoking a cigarette. When he saw the black policeman coming, he dodged his eyes and said with a depressed face, something happened at home, and I'm a little unhappy. Okay. The black policeman also lit a cigarette and said casually, then let that Karen stay a little longer. It just so happens that I also feel that this case is a bit strange. The black policeman looked at Brown. What do you think is the identity of the man in black? Brown frowned slightly, took a sharp puff of the cigarette in his hand, and then replied, I don't know, maybe she just made it up. Fabricated? Then she murdered the man who had nothing to do with her, and then dressed him up as a killer. The black policeman pondered. I don't know, LeBron, maybe it is, but we don't have evidence and we can't do anything. LeBron hugged his chest, leaned against the wall and hesitated for a moment, then approached Brown with a solemn expression. Have you heard a rumor? Brown glanced at LeBron unnaturally and shook his head. Some people say that there is a demon in Hell's Kitchen who wears black at night to fight evil and save good people. LeBron said with a funny expression. Maybe it's just a rumor, that guy has never shown up. Brown somewhat disagrees with him. No, some people in our police station have received some cases about this guy. Okay. Brown finished smoking the cigarette in his hand, threw away the cigarette butt, and planned to end the topic. Maybe he exists, but what's the use? This is Hell's Kitchen. He can only be a demon who brings nightmares to others, but not an angel who saves others. Brown's tone was a little excited, and his voice came far away. Okay, Brown, don't get excited. LeBron smiled and comforted Brown, a trace of doubt flashed across his expression. Why did Brown have such a big reaction? 10 hours later. Karen, are you okay? Matt questioned Karen, who was being carried by 2 police officers. Not too good. Karen was tortured by the atmosphere of the police station, and her expression was weak, and she responded feebly. Okay, let's get out of here first. Matt stepped forward, and Karen followed him outside the police station. Halfway through, Matt turned his head. Justice will always come, not in the police station, the court, but somewhere else. Hearing this thoughtless sentence, the 2 policemen showed displeasure. Under Brown's unhappiness, there was a trace of fear. A few minutes later, the 3 came outside. Karen, what's your next plan? Matt asked pointedly. Karen came out of the police station, barely recovering. She brushed her hair back, her beautiful eyes resting on Matt for a while. Find a place to sleep and talk about it when you wake up. Fudge interjected, do you have a place to live? I have, what's your phone number, Matt? Matt gives his phone number for Karen to remember. Wait for me to contact you, I'll go first. After Karen finished speaking, her figure disappeared into the night. Do you have any little secrets that I don't know about? Fudge questioned Matt suspiciously. No, I have not. Matt grins, as if to tell Fudge, yes, I do. When Fudge heard this, his face was hurt. I knew it, can't you keep a low profile? With you, I have no chance at all. He complained dissatisfied. Come on, Fudge, we can't have personal relationships with clients, it's our ethics. Matt retorted. Come on. Matt, you are the last person to say that. Fudge complained. I'll go back first, see you tomorrow. Then he turned to leave, saw that Matt didn't move, and asked one more question, aren't you going back? Matt nodded and said, I have something to do. It's not going to Karen, is it? Fudge said suspiciously, you're too impatient. No, I guarantee it with my personality, it's something else. Matt put away his joking face and said solemnly. Fudge was silent for a while, then whispered, well, you always have other things. He also looked at Matt quite seriously and said, Matt, don't work too hard, protect yourself. I will. Fudge left, and Matt watched him go away with some concern. Did he finally discover something? As the 3 left, it was time for the 2 policemen to get off work. In the police station, 2 police officers packed their things and prepared to leave. Brown, are you going to have a drink later? The black policeman finished cleaning up and asked a question. The black policeman is young, about 30 or years old. It's not a good time to work in this Hell's Kitchen. The police are far less powerful than the criminals and gangsters. Therefore, for the young and energetic black policemen who hate evil, the work here is not easy, and every moment is accompanied by danger. The veteran police officer Brown, who has been in Hell's Kitchen for more than 10 years, is very experienced in this area. Black policemen often heard in the police station how bravely confronted the evil forces of Hell's Kitchen when they were young, so they have always maintained respect for him and always consulted him. Brown is in his 60s and, his short hair has long been tainted by the years, and the wrinkles on his face have become increasingly clear. He smiled happily when he heard the invitation with a little concern. Kevin, I'm already an old man, you should find a beautiful and charming big beautiful girl to spend this wonderful night, instead of sitting in an old bar listening to dance music from the last century and thinking how to comfort a bad old man. Kevin smiled honestly and touched his head. Actually, I don't like that kind of life very much, but I would rather listen to your stories about the past. Brown shook his head helplessly. There's nothing to talk about, Kevin, no matter how good a guy is, he will grow old. The future belongs to you young people. Seeing that Kevin was unmoved, he could only continue to say, let me go, actually there is something wrong with my family today, as I said. That's it. Then you should deal with it properly first. Kevin suddenly realized, and then patted himself on the chest, if you need anything, be sure to tell me. Okay. I will. Brown smiled gratifiedly. I gotta go home lad, see you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Brown's car parked slowly downstairs. This is an old building. It is about the same age as Brown, and it seems a bit out of place in New York, a first-tier city in the world. Who would have thought that there would be such dilapidated and dirty buildings in this bustling and affluent city? Just like Brown, who was just transferred to Hell's Kitchen when he was young, he didn't expect that in the Big Apple City, there would be such a dirty place as Hell's Kitchen. Born in poverty, strong-willed, young and powerful, Brown, with firm belief, began his struggle against the forces of darkness. On his first big victory, he was decorated and given this house as a reward. At that time, he naively thought that one day he would wipe out the evil in Hell's Kitchen, and he would rise to the top. But, things completely changed after that. He stopped the car, coughed and walked into the building. He is 56 this year, and because of his lack of love when he was young, he has suffered from all kinds of problems. There was no elevator in the building, so he could only move slowly on the narrow and dark stairs, and walked to his home on the 6th floor, out of breath. When he came to the door of the house, he took out the key with difficulty and inserted it into the door lock, turned it, and pushed the door in. Stephen, is that you? The moment the door opened, a woman's voice came from inside the room. Yes. I'm back, how are you feeling today? He immediately put away his exhaustion, and responded angrily as if he was 10 years younger. I feel fine, why are you back so late today? A woman in pajamas came out of the bedroom. She was about the same age as Brown, with a very haggard face and a somewhat abnormally fat body. Brown smiled softly, and said, Are you hungry? What did you eat today? I'll get you something to eat. The woman shook her head and said no, and said to Brown with some distress, Don't be too tired, you are so old, let the young people do all the work. I know. You lie back and rest. Brown led the woman back to the bedroom and told her to lie down. The woman sighed and said, Don't be brave. It's always like this, don't blame me for not caring about you in the future. Brown heard this, his cheeks twitched, and then he forced a smile and said, How is it possible? You have to control me forever. I can't control it anymore. I don't have much time. The woman's voice gradually dropped. Don't be silly, Petunia. Brown stroked her face. Everything will be fine. I know, I've always believed in you. Living room. Petunia fell asleep again, and Brown sneaked up to smoke in the living room. The fan whirled and creaked above Brown's head, making Brown even more irritable. One cigarette after another was burned out, just like Brown spent more than 10 years of his life. In front of him was a pile of medicine boxes. These were the medications for Penny's diabetes, and most of them were empty. This dilapidated, small, air-conditioned house without an elevator was supposed to be just a starting point in his beautiful life, but in the end it became the end. From acquiring this house, he continued his valiant fight against crime. But gradually, he realized that something was wrong. Those criminals began to take precautions, and he missed frequently. He had waited for several years for promotion in the police station, but it was not his turn. Later, his wife suffered from diabetes, lost her job, and had to bear long-term medical expenses. But more than 10 years passed by, and he finally understood that justice should not exist in Hell's Kitchen. The residents here are all vagrants, illegal immigrants, and wanted criminals, who are more or less inextricably linked to criminals. If justice is really needed, then all people here should be judged. Including those guys in the police station. It's not just one or two colluding with the gang forces, but no one is not involved with those criminals. They bribed, shielded, tipped off, and even blatantly entered and exited various unusual places. Brown, who is unwilling to join forces, is of course marginally excluded. Everyone hated him, so he was still a policeman for so many years, and he didn't have a close friend. The closest one is the young guy who just came here not long ago. In him, Brown saw the shadow of himself when he was young. He really wanted to persuade that guy to apply to leave here early, taking advantage of the fact that he had not been here for a long time. But in the end, he didn't say it. He could see that if that child heard such words from his respected senior, he would be hit hard. Another cigarette burned out, and Brown subconsciously touched the cigarette case, only to find that it was empty. And he has no money to buy cigarettes. Medicine needs money, life needs money. Everything requires money. Is life more important than justice? The question that Brown spent most of his life thinking about has a different answer tonight. He took out his cell phone and dialed a number. Hello. The confessional of a church. It's been too long since I came to confess. Matt took off his sunglasses and began to talk to himself. My dad would take me to this church when I was little. He slowly began to recall the past. He was a traditional boxer with more losses than wins, with a record of 24 wins and 31 losses during his lifetime. Having said that, he blurted out a little excitedly. But he's tough. God, he's tough. Pay attention to the words. The priest on the side reminded me aloud. Sorry, Father. Matt eased his emotions and continued to talk. His former opponent said hitting him was like hitting an oak tree. He described his father sentence by sentence, as if the strong and tall man reappeared in front of him. When he lost, my dad's strategy was to hit anyone until they broke his hand. Matt paused, a hearty smile spreading across his face. He's never been knocked out, my dad. He continues. Of course he got knocked down, but he always got back up. When he loses, he always stands firm. But sometimes, he gets beaten for a while. Matt's voice dropped. And then it just exploded. Then he changed the subject. My grandma, she's a devout Catholic, very God-fearing, you'll like her. She said, be careful with the Murdoch men, they have demons. Sometimes, you can see it. Matt's eyes became colder a little bit. Just in the ring, his eyes suddenly turned cold. Started to walk forward slowly, with his hands on his sides, as if he was not afraid of anything. His opponent saw his expression and wanted to run away from him. My dad would grab an opponent, trap him in a corner, and unleash his demons. At some point, Matt's tears dripped down silently. I didn't understand it at the time, I didn't understand what he was feeling deep down, at least not at the time. After Matt finished speaking, he fell silent. Then do you understand now? The priest answered. Maybe it would be easier if you told me what you did. Matt puts on his sunglasses. I don't want to confess my sins, Father, but I want your forgiveness. His face returned to expressionless. Things I'm going to do. In a small alley. Brown wore a mask and hat, and looked around furtively. He is waiting. Soon, a middle-aged man with a perverted face and a frivolous posture walked in. Brown. He looked at Brown and said, where's the stuff? Brown carefully observed the person coming, and shook his head. Where's the money? He spoke hoarsely. Here it is. The middle-aged man sneered. Aren't you quite able to carry it? I heard that you are the only tough one in this area. How did you behave yourself today? He sneered triumphantly, tossing a plastic bag to Brown. What about the stuff? Brown ignored the man's taunt, took the bag, tore it open and took a look. After confirming that the money was all right, he took out a document bag from his pocket and handed it over. Why do you want to kill this woman? While the man was checking the documents, he still couldn't help but speak. The man frowned, and said indifferently, this is not your business. I'm a policeman. Brown replied in a low and serious voice. Hearing this, the man laughed out loud as if he had heard a big joke. Yes, you are the police. He clapped his hands, pointed at Brown and said mockingly, a good cop who conspired with the gangsters and sold other people's information. With blue veins on Brown's face, he suppressed his urge to draw his gun, and said bitterly. Just this time. Be careful in the future. Once. The middle-aged man sneered. Once there will be a second, a third. You know that? Brown, some things only have 0 and an infinite number of times. He continued disdainfully. Or do you think that with the money, you can still be your good policeman? He laughed arrogantly. You have to remember that your handle has fallen into our hands. If you see me in the future, stay away from me. Fact squid. Brown angrily took out his gun directly, pointed at the man and said angrily. Show me some respect. You piece of shit. Hee hee. The man showed no fear, instead he pushed his head up. Shoot if you have the ability. See what will happen. Brown's hands trembled along with his face, but he still didn't fire the shot. He no longer had the courage to shoot. The years have eroded his fighting spirit and ideals, and he is no longer that passionate, indomitable young man. Life has crushed his back, and he has decided to let go of his persistence in his old age and give his wife the dull and happy old age that he deserves. The man sneered and turned his head to leave. At this moment, a black shadow suddenly flashed past. The man groaned and fell to the ground. "Who are you?" Brown pointed his gun at the man in black in front of him, and panic rose in his heart. "I'm late Justice." The man in black spoke. Sure enough, it was him. The devil of Hell's Kitchen, the devil who punishes all evil. Brown, who has been in Hell's Kitchen for many years, of course knows that rumor is true. Even, he used to appreciate this guy's behavior very much. Although as a police officer, it is a shame to have a good opinion of a vigilante, it means that someone is doing what is supposed to be done for them. But this is Hell's Kitchen, and police justice cannot be carried out in this sinful land. Only the devil can punish evil. But now, Brown only feels chills all over his body. Because, he has abandoned the justice that has been upheld for most of his life, and is heading towards the darkness that cannot be turned back. Bang bang bang. Brown shot, he had to kill this guy. He can't fall here, his wife is still waiting for him at home. But Daredevil reacted quickly, and a few dodges approached Brown. With a bang, Brown, who was not as healthy as before, was knocked down by Daredevil. "What are you going to do?" Brown asked, gasping for breath. Daredevil leaned forward, his voice low. "Tell me, who are you working for?" "I work for money." "Who?" Daredevil punches Brown hard. Brown screamed with a complicated expression. "I can't say, you know, this place is all his people." Brown finally spoke slowly. "King of Hell's Kitchen. Kim Bin." Daredevil straight up. "Yes." Daredevil slapped old Brown's neck with a palm, only heard a muffled groan, and Brown passed out. Kim and. The next day. Dong dong dong. Matt knocked on the door of a luxury apartment. This is the address Lynch gave him. Listening to the voices in the room, Matt's expression gradually became strange. After a while, the door opened. "Karen?" Matt asked a little uncertainly. "Yes, Matt, come in." Karen greeted them lazily in loose pajamas. After a while, Lynch, Matt, and Karen sat at a table and began to discuss the next step. "Karen, tell me where you put the files." Lynch asked with a yawn. Karen also had two big dark circles under her eyes, so she gave Lynch a blank look. "I copied the data to a USB flash drive, and it is now in the company." Lynch nodded, and then said. "Then, go get the information first, Matt, you protect Karen and go there at night." Matt tilted his head, facing Lynch with some puzzlement. "Why didn't you go?" Lynch spread his hands with an innocent look on his face. "I didn't say I won't go. It's just that I will be in the dark." He explained, "Now they can only know that you are protecting Karen. If they know it is me, the result may be different." "All right." Matt reluctantly accepted, but was a little puzzled. "Are you so worried about me?" "Of course, I believe you." Lynch replied winkingly, but it's a pity that Daredevil couldn't see it. But, Matt changed the subject, are those materials necessarily useful? He was suspicious. "Maybe we're just having fun for nothing." "Possible." Lynch agreed without hesitation. "If it works, we charge Karen's boss with murder etc." Matt nodded and continued, "But it is very likely that Karen's boss can only be punished, and there is almost no chance of involving Jean Bin." "Yes, but it's not useless." Lynch looked at Karen. "At least we can save Karen, can't we?" Hearing this, Karen smiled with a hint of embarrassment in his touch. "Well, you're right." Matt said rather helplessly. "Things are finalized, it just needs to wait until night falls." Lynch looked at Matt, a little eager to try. "Then do you want to wait here until night? How about we practice our hands? I'm not your opponent, you'd better practice with Karen, I'll come back at night." Matt shook his head immediately and stood up. The moment he turned to leave, he finally realized the feeling of his friend Fudge staying with him. There are billions of sour. On the top floor of a building, in front of the huge floor-to-ceiling windows, a man was holding a cane and smoking a cigar, quietly looking at the city below him. There was no fat on his big face, but it was full of deepness at this moment. His body was thick and huge, so burly that he didn't look like a human being. As the city gradually fell into night, his back was also stretched taller and taller by the sunlight. After nightfall, the city was his. He is the emperor of the city's dark world, Jin Bin. In the room, there is also a man with a unique temperament and a crooked sitting posture. There are target-shaped marks on the man's head, his expression is crazy, a little nervous, and he keeps playing with darts in his hands. He is Jin Bin's #1 killer, the mysterious Bullseye. After a long silence, Bullseye suddenly threw out the dart in his hand. With a bang, the dart brought a mosquito and stuck it on a target on the wall. Bullseye smiled smugly, a little maniacally. At this time, the door of the room was pushed open, and a thin man walked in. He is Jin Bin's other right-hand man, Wesley. Wesley walked quickly to Jin Bin, and then looked down at his toes in silence. He was waiting for Jin and spoke first. Bad news? Jin Bin's magnetic voice sounded in the quiet room. Yeah, sure that guy did it. Wesley replied calmly. This guy is really getting more and more noisy. Jin Bin's expression was calm, just like chatting with parents. He did cross a line a little bit. Wesley's face was calm, and he agreed with Jin Bin. Then just make him disappear. Jin Bin said in a regretful tone. In his heart, Daredevil is not an enemy, but just a bit of fun. As the emperor in charge of an underworld empire, he has a broad mind. He is willing to let a guy who makes a little trouble appear on his site, bringing fun to his life and bringing challenges to his subordinates. Of course, the premise is that you can't cross the line. If you cross the line, of course you have to pay the price. Jin Bin turned around, and the light projected on his back, pulling out a long back. With the cigar in his mouth, he turned his face to his #1 killer, Bullseye. Although this guy's nerves were a bit abnormal, it was because of this that Jin Bin was able to firmly hold the sharp knife in his hand without being harmed. Know what to do? He said to Bullseye. Bullseye grinned cruelly, twirling the dart in his hand twice before replying. Of course, find him, and let his head bloom. King wasn't satisfied with Bullseye's answer, but not the way he did it. No, you don't have to go to them, just sit back and wait, and they will come to you. Bullseye suddenly complained with some dissatisfaction. Why bother? King wasn't offended by his backlash, as Bullseye was always outspoken. You've got to be a little bit patient, you just have to wait until night falls. He comforted Bullseye like a child. Go down and let Wesley show you how to do it when it gets dark. Bullseye's consolation to Jin Bin was very helpful, and he went out obediently. Seeing that Bullseye finally left, Jin Bin picked up his cigar again. He walked slowly around the room, and Wesley stood aside without speaking. Wesley, unlike Bullseye, is Kim's real henchman. Unlike the abnormal target nerve, Wesley is normal, so he will be as cautious as a companion. Facing Jin Bin, who kept walking back and forth, lost in thought, he kept silent, and disappeared in the room like a potted tree next to him. Wesley. Jin Bin stopped suddenly and called out to Wesley. I am here. Wesley replied immediately. Jin turned his head, and Wesley saw that his face was a little dignified. Recently, have you noticed anything unusual? Wesley was a little surprised, and lowered his head to think for a while. There's nothing worth noting. Halfway through, Wesley raised his voice as if thinking of something again. It's just that the Russian mafia heard that someone was taught a lesson by a guy who caught bullets with his bare hands. What? Jin Bin's tone was a little angry. Why are you telling me now? The more he thought about it, the angrier he became, and he stared at Wesley angrily, making Wesley tremble. I thought it was a rumor, you know, there are too many lies. Do not. Kim interrupted him roughly. This is not, I have some hunch. His eyes shifted, then he waved to Wesley. Come here, and arrange a few people later. Under the night, two figures quietly entered a dark building. Matt, dressed in black and with black eyecloths, led the way undisturbed. Karen, in a dark coat and trousers, followed closely behind. Taking advantage of the darkness, they easily entered the first floor of the building. It was already 10 o'clock, the building was pitch black, and there was no sound at all. But this is not a problem for Daredevil, the night is the best environment for him to haunt. With his super hearing, the surrounding environment is presented in his mind one by one, allowing him to move freely in the night. In the darkness, Karen, who couldn't see at night, could only bump and fumble along behind Matt. Before long, Matt stopped somewhere. Where are the stairs? Matt asked Karen in a low voice. Aren't we taking the elevator? Karen didn't quite understand, because it was very difficult for her to move in the dark. Do not. Matt explained. Elevators are too dangerous, especially for you. Hearing what Matt said, Karen had no choice but to point out the location of the stairs. The two rushed to the stairwell. Which floor is it on? Matt stood looking up the stairwell and asked Karen casually. 6th floor. Karen replied. Matt raised his head and listened for a while with no expression on his face. As he listened, his face gradually became serious. After a while, he said to Karen solemnly. I'll go up first, you have to keep a floor away from me. Why? Karen's complexion changed, and she guessed something, her beautiful eyes revealed a look of uneasiness. Is there anyone up there? Matt nodded slowly. More than one. Karen rubbed her forehead and forced herself to calm down. Lynn, are you there? She couldn't help calling Lynch in a low voice, trying to find a sense of security. I'm here, don't worry, go. Lynch's voice seemed to ring in Karen's ears, making her calm down immediately. He's here, don't be afraid, Karen. So she summoned up her courage and said to Daredevil, I'm ready. Daredevil nodded and said, when you hear me knock on the armrest, stop and don't move. Okay. The two began to climb slowly up the stairs. 1st floor, 2nd floor. With a distance of about 1 floor, the two of them had reached the 4th and 5th floors. Everything was fine, nothing happened. Just walking to the 4th floor, Karen, who was a little too cautious because of Daredevil's reminder, felt a tremor coming from upstairs on the handrail. She stopped immediately, looking apprehensive. Are there really enemies? Daredevil stopped what he was doing, took a deep breath, and let his mind go blank. Doing so is also to maximize your own abilities. Under his sense of hearing, there were no less than 10 breathing sounds on the 6th floor. Although these people hide very well, their biological signs cannot be hidden. As long as the heart is beating, the blood is flowing, and the person is breathing, he can catch clues. Sure enough, their people had ambushed here early on. Just ambushing in this dark and narrow terrain. Daredevil sneered. Then see who is ambushing whom. He hunched over and walked lightly in the stairwell. The distance between 1 floor and 1 floor flew by in a second or two, and he was going to catch them all by surprise. He came. Daredevil heard someone reminding him. But. And it didn't work. His figure flashed across the corridor. Dang 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 dang. A dull gunshot with a silencer suddenly pierced the night sky. After the sound of gunfire, the situation reversed instantly. The person who was in ambush exposed his position and firepower, but the person who was ambushed sneaked into the darkness instead. Daredevil leaned against the wall at the end of the corridor, listening quietly to their movements. He was not in a hurry, because generally speaking, they were the ones who were in a hurry at this time. They are the ones ambush people. Group by 2 or 2, go find him. Sure enough, it didn't take long for them to start coming out of their hiding places in search of Daredevil in the dark. The opportunity has come. Daredevil rested his head against the wall, waiting for the 2 nearby figures to get in. Those 2 guys were supposed to be wearing body armor, tactical helmets, carbines, very well equipped. But as we all know, generally well-equipped characters are basically weak chickens. Really strong people have always raised their fists, hammers, axes, etc., and just do it with their heads down. Including but not limited to Lynch, Thor, Captain Marvel, Hulk and more. These 2 guys, in the eyes of Daredevil, are also 2 weak chickens. The 2 men gradually approached Daredevil using infrared thermal imaging glasses. The distance is approaching little by little. The hearts of the 2 gradually cheered up 12 points, because a person's figure had already begun to appear in their glasses. D3 found a suspected target. Repeat, D3 found a suspected target. It's coming, D3 will verify it right away. Roger that. Hearing the sound that was about to ring in his ears, Daredevil finally started to move. Daredevil, a proficient fighter, knows one thing. At this distance, fists are faster than guns. Swish. He flashed out of the darkness directly, with undiminished speed. Shot. Dang, 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 dang. The exclamation and gunshots lasted only 2 seconds before the 2 lost their voices and fell to the ground. Daredevil turned his head and moved a little. After killing the 2 guys, there was a hole in their siege. At this time, you can take the initiative to attack. 15 minutes later, Daredevil took a breath and relaxed a bit. According to his induction calculations, there are a total of 10 people in the team, and now there are no enemies that can move. It's time for Karen to come up and get the materials. He thought to himself, walking towards the stairwell. Call out. Suddenly, an extremely small sound broke the silence. Daredevil suddenly dodged with a face change. A dart with extremely fast speed passed across his face and penetrated deeply into the white wall next to him. Who? The Night Devil's cheek was scratched, and drops of blood continued to ooze. But what was even more troublesome was that he couldn't feel the voice that this person should have at all. The dart was also made of special material, exquisitely crafted, and the sound of breaking through the air was extremely small. It was almost directly inserted into his forehead just now. Another guy who knows what he's capable of. Daredevil leaned against the wall expressionlessly, letting the blood drip from his face, and focused on sensing all the sounds around him. He didn't feel hopeless. Monsters like Lynch were always rare. This guy, it's impossible to say nothing to Lynch. At this time, Bullseye Mask wearing a special uniform walked out slowly from one side frantically, spinning several throwing knives in his hand. Relying on the glasses on his face, he locked Daredevil again. He raised his hand, and a dart was shot silently at Daredevil not far away. Coming. Daredevil was refreshed, and his body immediately began to dodge quickly. His body was twisted at an abnormal angle, and he dodged a bunch of darts. But the last dart was shot at half the speed of the previous one, and it went straight to Daredevil's head. Can't escape. Daredevil felt a chill in his heart. Bullseye showed a smug and cruel smile, as if he had seen the scene of Daredevil's tragic death. But after a moment, his expression changed. The original pride and cruelty turned into surprise and anger. Because he saw that the dart was held in the hand of a person who appeared suddenly. Good shot. Lynch flattered and praised, and then squeezed the hard and sharp dart into a pile of scrap iron with force. But it's useless. You are courting death. The neurotic Bullseye was so stimulated by Lynch that he fell into a frenzy. Without thinking about the weirdness Lynch showed, he directly took out sharp weapons from his body and threw them out quickly. Lynch was floating in the air, looking indifferently at Bullseye and going crazy. Two hot sights suddenly projected out, turning quickly in the room, turning all the menacing flying props into fly ash. Putting away his heat vision, Lynch knocked down Bullseye in an instant. Now, tell me. Lynch was suspended in the air, looking down at him, and said in a cold tone, "Where is that guy Jean Bing?" Inside a newspaper office. A middle-aged reporter wearing a rustic beret and old-fashioned glasses on his nose was sorting out the materials on the desktop. These materials are all cases and news about a demon in Hell's Kitchen. All along, he has been tirelessly pursuing that legend. Drip drip. The phone on the table rang, and he picked it up casually. "Hey, what's the matter?" "Yurik, there is something I think you will be interested in." Yurik put the information on the table aside, covered the phone and asked in a low voice. "What? Don't play tricks on me again. You'll know when you come here." The person on the other side of the phone didn't say much. After hesitating for a second, Yurik agreed. "Hey, brother." Ulrich patted a dollar bill on a fat man who was working, and then said. "Better be a good one, Kobe." Kobe turned his fat face away, and blew a bubble while chewing on the candy. He took the money and swore to promise. "You know my Yurik, I always show you good things." With that said, he stood up and led Yurik into a room. Kobe put on white gloves, and then said to Yurik with some seriousness. "Are you ready to see something really, really cool?" Yurik urged impatiently. "Hurry up." "Okay." Kobe agreed and lifted a white cloth in front of him. A special stick or cane. It is very short, the stick body is black and red, the ends are silvery white, and there are two small wings on one side. These two small wings are densely covered with jagged teeth, and they look like very sharp blades. But Yurik shook his head and stretched out his hand to Kobe just after taking a look, and said disappointedly. "Give me back the money." Kobe defended with innocence. "Come on, man, I'm throwing gold at you. Isn't this a fun thing?" Still unmoved, Yurik said. "I've seen this thing, don't try to lie to me." Kobe continued reluctantly. "Well, then you must have never seen this." He picked up the stick, put away the sharp objects on both sides, and then turned one end of the stick slightly. The stick was extended immediately, and it was about to poke Yurik in front of him. Seeing that Yurik finally got a little interested, Kobe said, "You said to draw my attention to strange things, right?" Yurik carefully looked at the deformed stick, and gradually fell into deep thought. "This thing is really weird, isn't it?" Kobe smiled and said, "It looks like he got the money today." Unexpectedly, Yurik caressed the stick deeply, and said to himself. "You don't even know what this thing represents." At this moment, the excitement in his heart is beyond words. Because after searching for so long, he finally found the guy. Inside Jean Bin's office. "So, you just watched him take people away?" Jean Bing was smoking a cigar, and his cold eyes swept across the dejected subordinates in front of him. None of them, who failed to act and even watched Bullseye being taken away, dared to speak at this time. Everyone who knows Jean Bing's cruelty is afraid of being caught as a scapegoat. Wesley, you know what? Jean Bin suddenly spoke to Wesley on the side and said. In ancient times, subordinates who failed in their actions would commit suicide because they had no face to meet their boss. He puffed on the cigar so hard that the head turned red. After exhaling a puff of smoke, he suddenly stretched out his hand to grab a subordinate in front of him with a ferocious expression. Then why don't you die? The subordinate struggled in horror, his hands and feet kept beating on Jean Bing's thick arms. But the difference in size made his punching and kicking as weak as a 3-year-old child hitting an adult, which is ridiculous. Jean Bin pinched him and held him up in the air, watching his subordinates lose their vitality little by little. Then Jean Bin threw his subordinates aside like trash, and waved his cane at the next subordinate. These subordinates did not dare to resist, nor did they dare to run away, so they could only be tortured to death one by Jean Bing with desperation on their faces. 3 minutes later, Jean put down the corpse of the last subordinate with a relaxed expression. Wesley, handkerchief. Jean Bin held the blood-stained cane and said to Wesley, who looked to the side without squinting, as if he hadn't seen anything. Wesley immediately handed over a handkerchief and continued to keep quiet. Jean Bin took the handkerchief, and began to wipe the stick that meant a lot to him with tenderness in his eyes. We're in trouble, Wesley. After a while, Jean Bing spoke coldly. Hearing this, Wesley's eyelids twitched, and then he said. I believe that troubles can be solved. Jean Bin glanced at him with an ugly smile on his lips. What do you think he has planned? Wesley said without much thought. The kindness of helping others, the ridiculous justice, the aversion to evil. Aren't all superheroes like this? Hearing Wesley's remarks, Jean burst out laughing, looked at Wesley with a little surprise and said. I didn't expect you to know so much about superheroes. You like these stories? Wesley smiled awkwardly, and reluctantly replied. I loved watching it when I was little. Yeah, who didn't know about Superman when I was young? Don't you watch it now? Jean Bin said to himself with emotion, and then became serious again. If he's really Superman, there's a lot we can do with him, but if he's not. His voice lowered a little. Right now, he's just superhuman in ability. Wesley continued with an ugly face. Yeah, he's as powerful as a god. Jean Bin's tone was faint. Superman is not a god. Even if he is a god, he will perish because he is abandoned by believers. Wesley retorted feebly. Yes, of course Superman is not a god, he's just a superhero, and superheroes have their weaknesses. Jean Bing relighted a cigar and walked slowly to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Looking at the city outside the window, the aura and city palace belonging to the underworld emperor returned to Jean Bing. His dispassionate voice continued. We don't have the ability to kill this superhero. In the face of absolute power, these little mice in the dark can only flee and avoid, and they have no way to confront them head-on. Jean Bin and Wesley knew this well, so Jean Bin decided to change the way. But we can destroy this superhero. He looked at the great city under his feet with deep eyes and a cold tone. I will let him know that I am the master here. For a moment, Jean Bing's face was full of arrogance and confidence. But after a long time, Kim changed his tone of uncertainty. The premise is that he is the kind of superhero we imagine, like Superman.